Good to see you. Well, good to be seen by you. A lot of stuff going on. You know, may I just say, as we begin the program, that, well, we've been in the TV business for about a week. Actually, I thought it was a lot simpler than this. I think it's because of the idiotic content that I see on most television channels. Nothing against those people, just the content's rubbish in most cases, 90% certainly. And anyway, this episode of CTM, I believe, will illustrate to you why I wanted to do this in the first place and why I wanted to live stream really during the day. We're getting there. As I say, I thought it was a little easier than this, but it's not. But we're very close. And in any case, you'll have the archive programs and some video to go along with them. And we'll do a lot of extra shows. We're putting it all together now so that nobody feels like, say, what is this? You didn't do what you said you were going to do. But we will, and we'll make up for any deficiencies in programming up to this point. I'll just tell you that's just how it is. And one of the ways that we're going to make up for it is by delivering what we promised, and that is to provide content to you that is not idiotic. Though it may be viewed by some as idiotic, but it's not idiotic. What it is content that cannot and certainly would not have been broadcast over any of the regular media outlets, including the radio program I was formerly associated with, because it's just a bit strong for some. And you know, you're not only dealing with a corporation and that environment, but you're also dealing with individuals within that corporation that may have some objections to what you have to say, or worse, it's not so much my opinions about things. My opinions probably parallel your own in many ways. And speaking those over the public airwaves is not really a problem. However, there are some comments from certain guests, certain persons that we interview, that would have been, well, as it was back just a few weeks ago. I would get calls and emails. The calls never made it onto the open lines, but the emails, I read them. And whenever we had a controversial guest on there, I'm serious about this. I mean, I do not make this up. On the Mac computers, the little color wheel would go around. The PC, the Windows-based machine would have to be restarted, and usually a hard restart, meaning shut it all off and then turn it all on again. And more to the point, the guest's speech, as well as my own, would be just cut out of the programming. I cannot tell you how many occasions this occurred when listeners would send emails to me saying, as soon as your guest began to answer your question, the program went blank. It went blank until they had a couple of Amber Alerts, and they had a couple of public service announcements, and they had a fragment of an infomercial, a sales show. And 40 minutes later, the program came back on, and that hour was not repeated on playback. So it's not some sort of let's make it sound spookier than it really is. Let's try and infuse some panache, artificial as it may be, to try and make it look important when it's really not. No. There was rampant, massive censorship of the program I was formerly associated with, and I think it'll be more difficult to do that now. In fact, I feel pretty certain of it. On this episode, we will visit with Rabbi Steve Ben Denoon. Actually, Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon. I've become well acquainted with Stephen, and that way it turns into Steve. But I do not mean any disrespect or over-familiarity when I say that. He's a rational man. He is a biblical scholar. He lived in Israel. He has many, many contacts in Israel. I'll just leave it at that. If he wants to reveal what those contacts are, which I don't much think he will, he's free to do so. But I feel certain that some of the things he has to say will enlighten and possibly even disturb you. Now, I found this pretty disturbing. The government labels those who grow their own food extremists. This is from, Natural Society. Those who mean to lord over us, this is by Christina Sarich, possibly Sarich, Christina Sarich, S-A-R-I-C-H. This is from, February 11, 2014. Those who mean to lord over us, such as the Department of Defense, have now called people who grow their own food radical and extremists. Sound familiar? It's just like the U.S. calling other nations terrorists when our government has terrorized more of the free world than we could even imagine. It's basically called its own citizens terrorists already with NSA spying, she writes. How in the world has it come to this? Americans are becoming serfs to their own government, much the same way the British monarchy forced self-sufficient farmers to divide up their land that the British made into monocropping plots. So they could then tax the heck out of everyone and make them reliant upon the same system of tenant farming, which then enslaved the masses. And ain't it the truth? What's worse, even the Founding Fathers are considered extremists. The Founding Fathers are considered extremists by the Pentagon. The Pentagon. According to a new training manual, farmers are labeled extremists. This bit of information was discovered by the legal watchdog Judicial Watch as part of a Freedom of Information Act request. It was included in over 133 documents produced by the Air Force to teach our military to root out extremism in a student guide. Those who would decide to grow some organic cabbage, non-GMO corn, even tomatoes, for example, would be considered a threat to national defense. Yes, even though the document says this is for training purposes only, quotes, and do not use on the job, that's also in quotes. Why on earth would such a reference be made? It's simply preposterous, Christina says, or writes. The manual goes on to pigeonhole those who would have the gall to grow their own food. An extremist is a person who advocates the use of force or violence, advocates supremacist causes based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, or national origin, or otherwise engages to illegally deprive individuals or groups of their civil rights. In addition, it says, nowadays, instead of dressing in sheets or publicly espousing hate messages, many extremists will talk of individual liberties, states' rights, and how to make the world a better place. Now that is pretty darned extreme, if you ask me. How can you possibly imagine making the world a better place? I mean, seriously, folks, this is ridiculous. Christina writes, I am a writer, but I have no words. So essentially, as we've all suspected of late, if we believe in supporting our own rights, if we believe in freedom, sovereignty of food, and lifestyle, then we're enemies of the state and the federal government. I'm not sure what country we live in anymore, but certainly it isn't the one in which we allow freedom to ring. Many of our founding fathers were farmers. Many of them spoke of ways to make the country a better place. Upholding basic human rights does not equate to terrorism like a stack of pancakes. They flipped the truth over on itself. The document was obtained from the Air Force, but originated in the Department of Defense office, which means it is likely used for training and in other military branches. I do sincerely hope that there are still men and women in midst, like Edward Snowden, who will stand for what is right and not for rhetoric and blatant propaganda. Don't let them turn us against each other. That is their plan, and I completely agree. You want to hear a good one? U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder will step down this year, he said in an interview with the New Yorker's Jeffrey Toobin in the magazine's February 17 edition, which means it's coming out in future. In a feature article, Mr. Holder says he plans on staying in his position well into the year. Last November, Mr. Holder, the first black attorney general for, I don't even know why they qualify this article with that. It's from the Washington Times, but whatever. Mr. Holder, yes, Mr. Holder. Well, he told CBS News he didn't have any plans to step down. That's last November. Attorney General Holder has made voting rights the test case of his tenure. The New Yorker reported he's been a vocal critic of the Supreme Court case that invalidated key parts of the Voting Rights Act and has supported congressional action to renew and revise the law. During his 5 years as the nation's top law enforcement officer, Mr. Holder has also weighed in on other controversial Supreme Court decisions. Mr. Holder said he wouldn't defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court, and over the weekend announced the Department of Justice's plans to give same-sex couples the same rights in the federal legal system as married heterosexual couples, regardless of whether a state recognizes same-sex marriage. Well, I'm thinking same-sex marriage is probably not the biggest problem we have to deal with on our plates at present, but what do I know? All right, let's take a dive into the depths of well, not depression but concern. Fukushima news: government radiation levels too high in Unit 4, coming from small pieces of cobalt-60. Workers forced to cover floor with lead. Experts say significant loss of leak tightness possible in Fukushima fuel pools. A seismologist could easily have M6 quake below Fukushima plant with very destructive results. Professor says there's no way to stabilize fuel pool against a strong quake. Well, duh. Delete everything after duh. Top U.S. nuclear official in Fukushima: we won't know if molten fuel burned into Earth until we get a device inside to look. And what device would that be? Oh, well. Another expert: all 3 reactor cores may have melted down into groundwater. Well, I'll tell you something. Looking into my crystal ball, it's already done it. It doesn't take molten, unput-outable nuclear fuel that long to melt into the earth and melt into the groundwater. That occurred, what, almost 3 years ago next month. A top U.S. nuclear official in Fukushima, yeah. Okay, Japanese TV, quote, and now concerns are growing. A new source of leakage at Fukushima. The situation could become even more serious. Groundwater expert: I doubt even experts could have imagined. Well, you know what that means, folks. That means they're not experts. An expert is someone who knows all that there is to be known about a given subject or topic. If experts are baffled, they're not experts. A science magazine: radioactive substances that wash up on beaches can enter the water supply. You think? Particles left on sand after high tide accumulate. Important process with Fukushima releases. BBC: scientists surprised at how much higher radiation levels are in some parts of the ocean from Fukushima. It's a mystery. KPBS: Fukushima radiation is just going to become a way of life for us. California professor says it's certainly going to be in the environment, it just doesn't go away. I think he's an expert. Fukushima radiation data is wildly wrong, finds groundwater close to ocean nearly 170,000 times legal limit for strontium-90. Fearing similar underestimates, many more results yet to be revealed. Government experts warn about massive corium melting deeper than Japan. TEPCO claim Fukushima cores could be eroded more extensively than announced. So I suspect the whole situation is more eroded than TEPCO previously announced. TV: Fukushima underground dam not working. Radiation levels now exceeding government limit near shore. The flow of contaminated water into the ocean is causing problems. It's quite difficult to stop. Well, there you are, folks. Now, I answered the phone today, and it was a fellow in Canada. He says, "This John?" I went, "Yes." And he said, "Hey, this is up in Canada." I said, "How you doing?" He said, "What are you doing answering the phone?" I said, "I don't know, it was ringing. I was near it, so I answered it." He said, "Okay, well, you got a minute?" "Sure." He said, "You know, I have a Geiger counter." He goes, "I didn't get it from you, but," he goes, "actually, yours are more reasonably priced," and they are. He said, "But my background levels are quite high compared to the way they usually are." And I said, "What do you usually get?" He said, "Usually 18 to 22 counts per minute." I said, "What are they now?" He said, "Well, they spike up into the mid-60s, and And then I believe he was talking about going from Seattle or Portland down to San Francisco, I want to say, but it was on the West Coast. And he said that it was his friend that had taken his Geiger counter with him, and they spiked up all the way off the scale. Now, here's the thing. Now, hold on, I got a cough. You didn't want to hear that. It's probably cesium-137. I hope not. What he said was not that they did what the video on YouTube that many of you have seen, where it went up into the 150s and started beeping. He said it went all the way to the edge of its scale. And when you take a flight, when you get up to 35,000 feet, the background levels are going to go up, and it is ionizing radiation. But again, as we've mentioned many times, it's what kind of ionizing radiation, how much, and for how long you're exposed to it. Now, somebody told me also today, this is not verified, I'm just saying what I was told today, that Asiana Airlines is restricting their flight attendants and pilots to it was either one flight per week or one flight per month. I will follow up on that now that I've mentioned it and make sure that I give you an update in the future. But in any case, they're restricting the amount of flying that they can do. And it was obvious on this flight from the Pacific Northwest down toward California that they had flown through a plume. And so that's just how it is. And notice another thing that's completely dropped off the scope is the condition of the servicemen and women that were aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the aircraft carrier, out near Fukushima when they went right through the plume. No, we're clear of the plume. No, they weren't clear of the plume. And those people are suffering terribly for having gone through the plume. Well, from LouRockwell.com, anti-state, anti-war, pro-market, staying out of other people's wars. Patrick J. Buchanan writes, if these negotiations, according to Senator Richard Durbin, with Iran fail, there are two grim alternatives, a nuclear Iran or a war, perhaps both. Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham, why is it always those two together? I'll investigate it and possibly report them. Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham returned from the Munich Security Conference saying that even John Kerry agrees that President Obama's Syrian policy has failed. They are urging another look at airstrikes. They're urging another look at airstrikes, even though Assad didn't release those chemical weapons, according to all reports. It was the so-called Syrian rebels, the anti-Assad forces, that released the chemical weapons. North Korea is warning that should the annual U.S.-South Korea military exercises go forward in March, it could mean war, possibly nuclear war. People keep saying that North Korea is the trigger. I don't know why they're saying that, but I'm going to get into it and find out. And I won't report it. I'll bring somebody onto this program that will report it for us, because they have, well, they have the depth of expertise, and they have the experience, they have the contacts. And therefore, we are connected to them. Because we are connected to them, we are also connected to their contacts. Philippines President Benigo Aquino III, B-E-N-I-G-N-O, President Aquino III, this week compared his country's situation to Czechoslovakia in 1938 and the disputed islets off his coast in the South China Sea to the Sudetenland. Like Hitler in Europe, Aquino is saying China is on the march in Asia. Aquino wants the world, meaning us, to stand up to China. That is not a bad idea. Do you know they have bought so many companies? It's absolutely incredible. In fact, I'm looking for it right now, but I'll find it. You know, it's been a mystery to me why there's so much turmoil in the Middle East. And the interesting thing is that trouble, most all trouble, comes from where you least expect it. And I've wondered for years, Israel is a tiny little country Why can't it just be left alone? And people say, oh, well, because it's the site of many, it's the location of many holy sites and holy relics and all kinds of things. But it's like, yeah, but isn't it a good idea to just continue to keep talking? I mean, why? I mean, why are they blowing things up? Why are they blowing up children in buses? Why? And I mean, I have seen both sides of it. I remember, this is many years ago. This has got to be 20 years ago, maybe more, that some Palestinian kids were throwing rocks at some Israeli soldiers. And, I think one of them got smacked with one of the rocks, as I recall, pretty good. And up came the rifle, and the kid got killed. And I just thought, wow, that's awful. It's my view of the world is that the killing of a person, even if technically they deserve it because of some heinous act that they've committed, is a terrible, sad, disgusting, and tragic thing. So why is Israel the source of so much angst and the focus of such attention? Iran, we will wipe Israel off the map. Some say they never said that. Others say they did. I mean, it seems to me I remember seeing Ahmadinejad saying that very thing. But I don't speak his language, and he wasn't speaking English when he delivered it, so there was the translation down at the bottom. So who knows? Who really knows what's being said and by whom? Even though we're sitting there watching it on the screen. You know as well as I do that the mainstream media has become nothing but a propaganda engine. It goes all the way back to that heavyset guy in the Three Stooges saying, relax, you know how the newspapers build these things up. Well, sure they do. And I've said this before. No news anchor or news presenter is going to come on television and say, you know what, it was a beautiful day all over the world today. No, we had a couple of car wrecks, and that's sad, but altogether, the angst level was really low. So, tell you what, we're going to go straight to the entertainment show, followed by some sports, and then we're going to have a movie. We're signing off now. No bad news today. Hooray. They've never done it. They're never going to do it. You remember, you've heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, that's true. But what we're going to try and bring on this program is stuff for you to listen to, watch, and of course the presentation will become more sophisticated as we go along. I don't want it to turn into a game show with lots of flashing lights and so forth. And in fact, the next time you see me, or maybe the time after, I may have an old school microphone sitting on the table, because I'm really comfortable with the old school microphones. Because I've spent most of my professional career with my face in one of them. But anyway, we want to bring as much to you as quickly as we can. And here's one. 120 European firms bought by the Chinese investors in 2013. Now, this is from the China Money Report. For those of you in the West, in case you're taking notes, there is no free lunch in this world. Decades of trade deficits carry consequences. That money comes back and takes ownership. This is the part where you go from landed peasantry to landless serf, meaning you till the land of others as you have lost ownership. China investors bought out a record 120 European companies in 2013, many of them German or British companies, according to a report by Ernst & Young. Chinese companies bought a total of 25 German and British companies last year, and China becoming Germany's sixth biggest investor, following the United States, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, France, and Austria. In addition to Germany and the United Kingdom, Chinese firms acquired 15 companies in France and 7 each in Italy and Sweden. And Chinese parts are so good, there's been a massive Aston Martin recall as a result of them, and illegal Chinese parts have been used on our F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. And the military buys Chinese workout machines. not American-made ones, which are slightly more expensive. No, they get theirs from China. The question is, what will you do with this information? Here's a little more. Chinese investors placed more focus on the industrial sector, consumer goods, and real estate, with 24, 21, and 10 out of the 120 firms bought belonging to these sectors respectively. So that's 24 in the industrial sector, 21 in consumer goods, and 10 in real estate. Sun Yi, a partner in Ernst & Young, said China is buying European firms because it wants to strengthen its innovative capabilities through the European market and technology. Germany's automobile manufacturing sector, for example, is a popular sector for Chinese investors. Chinese companies will particularly focus on prospective industries such as the automobile sector. Sun stated that the Chinese automobile industry is eyeing the global market. Specialized technology, outstanding employees, and established sales channels through European brands are needed for China's industrial development. With the Chinese government relaxing curbs on global investments, more Chinese investors are expected to foray into Germany and other European countries this year, Sun said. I told you China was a problem. I'm not the only one who told you that either. The question is, what will we do about it? Let's proceed. This is another short graph. A partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers said mergers and acquisitions involving Chinese firms in foreign countries is expected to see at least 25% growth in 2014. Additionally, their focus will be placed not only on natural resources such as petroleum and natural gas firms, but also emerging sectors such as biomedicine, environmental protection, and the internet. Doing a program like this, doing a program like AJ does, doing a program like many of the Patriot networks do, doing a program like the radio program I was formerly associated with, you would think that that would make us targets of some sort, wouldn't you? They're not here for me. They're here for you. Game of Shadows. All right, Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon is next on Caravan to Midnight. Please stand by. And now it is my pleasure to bring onto the program someone you may find very, very interesting. Now, we have heard a lot about the, shall we call it, just saber rattling between Iran and Israel, and really Iran and us. John Kerry's ridiculous trip to, the result was ridiculous, of trying to strike a deal with them, and then after Kerry came back to Washington, the Iranians said, we didn't make any deals, we didn't agree to stop enriching, and now they, just yesterday, released information that they have improvements made to their enrichment process 20 times faster than before. So I would say they're about 30 minutes away from their bomb. Benjamin Netanyahu has warned us repeatedly that these guys are a problem. And then the Russians, of course, are saying, we will intervene if you engage with Iran. So what's all this about? And more to the point, what's the push for the two-state solution? Well, I'm not there, and you're not there more than likely. I mean, somebody viewing this program might be there or have been there recently, but we're not there, and we don't know except what we get from mainstream media, which is exactly why we have departed from the doctrine of mainstream media and gone directly to people who know. So without further ado, let us bring onto the program author, biblical scholar, student of Hebrew, a former resident of Israel, author of 2 books, Israel is Still God's People, and Yom Soup, Israel's Final Exodus. His website is israelreturns.com, and he is Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me on. And it is privilege to get to come on. And I'd like to definitely, I'm sure you've already heard this already, but congratulate you for starting Caravan to Midnight. I know there's been many things that you wanted to bring out as well, especially in light of the two-state solution, all the events that are taking place around Israel right now, but just have not been able to bring that out. But this platform here, this podcast here, is giving the people around the world another avenue in which to be able to hear news that is uncensored, and I thank God for that. There's a lot going on. I know the funny thing is back when and I'll kind of start off with the two-state solution, when the process began with John Kerry and the United States brokering this 9-month negotiations. One thing that happened was a friend of mine had mentioned to me, he said, gosh, that sounds a lot like where Micah spoke about the Israel is in travail. And that's really where I really got more engaged into this particular process as well. Looking at the significance, because Israel truly is a biblical people, and they have a right to be in their homeland. And so when John Kerry decided that this, or I say John Kerry decides this, whether or not it's John Kerry, whether it's Barack Obama, but he's the one that spearheaded this 9-month negotiation, it has certainly brought about a lot of birth pains in the process. And where we're at now is we are nearing the end of that process. We're 7 months into this negotiation process. Israel has backed away, came back forward. And here now we're down to the last month and a half, 2 months, which will be in Israel ourselves at the end of March for the finalization of this process that they're going through to see whether or not will it bring two states at that time. I personally think, John, it's definitely going to bring it. But at any rate, though, the negotiations when they began, it's kind of funny that they call it a negotiation. It seemed to start a little bit in earnest. Abbas being the Palestinian, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Palestine, who is the one that would come to the negotiating table with Benjamin Netanyahu. And, of course, Israel uses Ms. Levini to represent Israel in the negotiations. But it didn't take no time at all before we begin to realize that the only person, or peoples in this case, that's making any concession in this process is the state of Israel. Everything is, Abbas is demanding that you give us this, you give us that, you're going to move back to the 1949 borders, pre-1967 war borders, which basically puts Israel on a little bitty 8-mile stretch of land, and then they're supposed to defend themselves against the Iranians, as you brought up, John, the Iranians, and knowing that we are supposed to be negotiating, and I say we because I am Jewish by birth. This is my own birthright, both mother and father being non-practicing Jews, but I come from a non-practicing Jewish family. But we should have a right to our homeland and be able to live in peace as well. But here we are negotiating with people that have sworn to wipe Israel off the face of the map. In fact, Yasser Arafat, he died the very day that I was leaving Israel. When I lived in Israel, I was coming back to the United States, and he died that same day. I remember the rabbis being in the street praying for his death, and then he dies. Now, Israel was blamed for his death, but in fact, it was not the Jewish people that caused this man's death. He was poisoned for one reason, and I know it's stepping out a little bit on a limb to say this, John, but the Vatican ended up having to take him off the scene. And the reason being, and this is my own observation in this, is because what happened with Yasser Arafat was he was almost willing to get a complete compromise for a two-state solution until he found out that the Vatican wanted to make sure that the Jewish people's third temple be built on the Temple Mount. And he said, no way. And he would not back down from that stance. Otherwise, we would already have two states in Israel going on. But when he would not back down from that, that's when they realized there was a problem because Israel had made all the concessions up until that time. And, one thing, though, John, that really kind of troubled me is when they began to, in exchange for this peace process, just to keep the peace process going, Israel had to begin to concede to allow all the prisoners to be released. And Abbas was not satisfied with just releasing a handful of maybe political prisoners. He was bent on having the terrorists that were known terrorists, that had blood on their hands, that orchestrated suicide bombings, etc., in Israel, that had killed literally hundreds and hundreds of Jewish families that have displaced their lives. And, John, in 2004, the Al-Aqsa Mosque Brigade had orchestrated one of those such terrorist attacks near French Hill, near a bus stop there. And I lived right there in a place called Givat Hamivitar. And I was going out myself, walking down the sidewalk, and just as I'm going down, John, this car pulls up, lets out this young lady, and she starts heading to the same bus stop. I'm not going to the bus stop. It's just a little place I used to like to hop over the curb and I'd go pray for a little bit. But anyway, as I'm coming down myself, a strange thing happens. Now, it wasn't like a voice spoke to me, but just a thought in my mind. If you go this way, you'll get to the corner, and you got another phone call to make. And I was calling friends back in the United States, and you won't leave that corner. You're just going to stay right there. And when you do, it just said you'll stay right there, and you won't move. And the odd thing was, John, is I had actually, before I started coming down the sidewalk, I had already started down a path that goes to the same area that I used to like to resort to. But as I started to go down that way, a thought came to my mind, like, you idiot, why are you going this way? If you go, you hate this way. And it was true. It's funny how these thoughts were just in my head. But I thought it was me thinking this. And as I started down that steep hill, and I hated it because it's really hard on your shins. So I turned around, and I come back. And as I get out on the sidewalk and I started back, that's when she's being dropped off. Now, she's a little further behind me. We're not like side by side or anything like that. She's further behind where they dropped her off because they didn't want anybody to see that she's being dropped off. She's dropped off from the French Hill side. I'm coming from the opposite side of the street on Givat Hamivitar side. And that's when the second thought comes to my mind. Well, finally, I just said, oh, fine, I'll just go down the hill then. I turn around, and by the time I turn around and start coming back, then she's coming around the curve. And then I started down, and both ways are parallel to one another, even the way that I took away from her. But what it was is it took me down lower, below, as the mountain started to go down, it kind of shielded me from the blast. Now, the whole point of this is that, it wasn't long after that, just as I got clear, she blew herself up. The pole that I always stood beside when I came back up from the blast, I knew something had blown up. It was obvious something blew up, and because it nearly knocked me off my feet, just a concussion, even though I was probably, 40 meters from her at that time. But I come back up, and that pole where I would have stood was just tore up with shrapnel. She killed the two soldiers that were there. And so I bring this out, John, because for me, I can understand why that the families that are victims of the terrorism that has happened in Israel since the Intifada started in 2000, to see what is called a peace process, and it's starting out not with peace, but to release all the terrorists, to go back into the West Bank, back into Gaza, to do what? To start over the campaign of terror that we went through during the Intifada. For them, it's much more painful. For me, I was not injured in this attack, but yet at the same time, I can understand their anguish, because the people that orchestrated the attack, that killed this girl that was only 18 years old, that sacrificed her life to kill two Jewish people. She wounded 16. Had she made it to the bus stop, it would have been much worse, no doubt about it. But to watch all these terrorists, and John, I'm not talking about a situation of maybe 1 one or two terrorists. We're talking about hundreds of, I think it was like it's over 200, I think it's nearly 300 known terrorists. And they had said, I say they, this is Abbas and his administration in the West Bank, had said that they will not accept any peace with Israel, and there will be no two-state solution unless every single one of the Palestinian prisoners are released. I mean, this is a suicide mission, and yet they call this a peace agreement. Release terrorists, and we'll give you peace. That just doesn't make any sense at all to me. And so this has been one of the issues. And of course, then we have the part of when it comes to the land. And the PLO clearly said that they want East Jerusalem. Actually, they wanted all of Jerusalem. They don't want just part of Jerusalem. But when Kerry has brokered the plan, one of the things that he has brought out in the plan is that the Palestinians will get East Jerusalem. Now, that's including the Kotel, where what is known to most people as the Wailing Wall area, that it will come under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority. So where do the Jewish people get any right to anything? I mean, that's the only holy place we have left in reality that we can call a holy place for the Jewish people, and even that we have to give up. So the whole agenda here is much deeper than just two states. The Palestinian people, though, John, are pawns in this game. Now, I mean, there's a couple of guys, and hopefully they'll be on your show before too long. Giulio Miotti. Now, Giulio Miotti is an Italian journalist, but he also writes for Arutz Shiva. The bravest Italian guy I know of. He's not Jewish, but he is very, very pro for the Israeli people. He's written two books here, one more recently called The Vatican. Let's see here, I got the name of that right here before me here. The Vatican Against Israel. Much like Barry Chamish, who's written, he's a gentleman that wrote, Barry is Jewish. Barry wrote Rabin's Assassination, Who Murdered Yitzhak Rabin, and Last Days of Israel is another book that he's authored. And he's authored more works besides that. Both these men are news journalists that have done extensive research. And in Barry's case, it was a situation of not that he was looking to see if the Vatican was involved in this. He stumbled upon this after he wrote the book about Yitzhak Rabin's assassination, and there he writes about how that Shimon Peres was behind Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. And as well, because I talked to Barry today, I asked him what did he think about Ariel Sharon when he went into the coma. He said, Steve, he said, I've written about that as well. It's because I knew that Ariel Sharon had been poisoned. Some resource to back that up, but I knew that was true from the intelligence community that I'm affiliated with, that he had been poisoned. And Barry says that he has the proof that it was Shimon Peres. Now, how do you get away with all this type of murder in Israel and not come to justice? And John, you'd asked me a little while back about Zionism. And by the way, if you need to interrupt me at any time, don't feel free to slow me down, or I'll just go on a rampage here. But he had brought out, or John, you brought up a question to me one time when we were on together on a radio program together, a little offbeat program, and you'd asked me about Zionism. There are two forms of Zionism. One is what was called a political Zionism. Another is called a religious Zionism. And the political Zionism is the part that is not good in Israel. This is where we get people like Shimon Peres, who basically hates his own people. It's just sad to say it, but he does.
I got to ask a couple of questions here. This is a little bit of a digression, but bring us up to speed on several things. Number one, and I've said this many times, particularly on the radio program I'm no longer associated with, that according to audience members and depending upon what fragment of what sentence they extracted something that they think that I said, I am alternately a Zionist, a Nazi, a left-winger, a right-winger, a genius, or an idiot. So, I don't really think I'm any of those things. But
no, you're not.
But here's the thing. I and I'm sure that it's impossible to put this into a short sentence because I've got just a series of sort of rapid-fire questions here. And the first one is a big one. Why is that area of the world in such conflict all of the time, it seems? That's number one. And if and why are these, for example, the Wailing Wall? None of us really know. I mean, many of us do, but most of us do not even know why that is such an important place. What is its significance? Why do people go there? And then, of course, you've brought up many things. I mean, I've got so many questions for you. It's ridiculous. It's like Arafat apparently was poisoned. They're saying it was polonium. And now, did you say Rabin was poisoned?
Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. Yitzhak Rabin actually was shot. But Ariel Sharon was the one that was poisoned.
Sharon. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Why is this area in such conflict? I mean, people say, they've been going at each other for 2,000 years. It's like, well, I haven't been around for 2,000 years, so I don't know if that's true or not. But what? Just philosophically, is it just so diverse that Israel has just always been a target? I mean, what is it?
That's the part when it comes down to prophetic. So I mean, we can call it philosophical, but it really does come down to well, there's two things that I look at. Modern times, it's more a fulfillment of Rebecca when she had the two children in her womb, Esau and Jacob, and the children are wrestling in her womb, and when she goes to God and she says, why is this happening to me? That's in the plain layman's terms. Why is this happening to me? He says, because there's two nations in your womb. Now that is ironic in itself that God would call two little boys, and he said when they come forth from the womb, they'll be separated. That's exactly, in my opinion, that is a prophetic reference to the negotiations that are happening right now. And it's one reason why, John, I believe that they'll actually divide the land of Israel today. But when you look at the philosophical aspect, this is why there's so much turmoil in Israel today. Now, a lot of people go back and they say Ishmael and Ishmael and Isaac, and Abraham having the promised son, and of course Ishmael through Hagar. The Muslim people believe that was the promised son. The Jewish people believe and write in their Bible that it was that Isaac was the promised son, and so therefore they've been at each other's throats for all these years. But in the modern days, John, it has nothing to do. I mean, the Muslims, yes, Islam was created by the Vatican. It was created by the Vatican to put a stop to the religious Zionism and to put a stop to the spread of what the Vatican calls heretics. So they created that back in, 550, around that time there, to stomp out the Jewish people that had become Christians. They wanted to put a stop to them. And at the same time, to get rid of all the heretics, because the ultimate goal for the Vatican is to be in Jerusalem. That's their ultimate goal. And that's why you see the Palestinians become a pawn in this game, because it's written in all of our rabbinical literature, as far as in Orthodox Judaism, that it is that Edom, or Esau in this case, Esau is called Edom, is Rome. And so Rome is, once again, as they were 2,000 years ago, in control of Israel, before Israel was destroyed in 70 AD by Titus the Roman general. Now, it's like the whole stage, John, is being reset again, and Rome is fixing to be back in control. Whether we like it or not, and I despise it, but you know, what can I do except be a voice to it? Now, when they tell you that, John, that you're a Zionist and that you're a Nazi and all that kind of stuff, that's because people are not separating the difference between political Zionism, such as Shimon Peres and a lot of the other political leaders that have risen up, they're Jews in name, but they're not Jews at heart. If they were Jews at heart, they would care about our land. They would not be out there trying to divide our land. And people like Benjamin Netanyahu, Shimon Peres, excuse me, not Shimon Peres, but Ariel Sharon, when they first came up as prime ministers of Israel, in their first campaigns, they were lions because they were not so much the political Zionists. They come more from the side of they love their country because of the God of Israel that they represented. But you notice in both men's second term, they began to have to bow down to the world pressure. And so therefore, I don't fault them for what they're doing. But that, when it comes to the Zionism of the Jewish people that came from, like my mother's family, that came from Europe, we came to America illegally, but it was only like 4 brothers that came here. They came here illegally before the Holocaust. The rest of the family was either killed in the Holocaust or they went to Israel, because we have relatives that live in Israel that were during the Holocaust. These are the type of people that were true Zionists. Now, I'll tell you something that will blow your mind away on this. Tovia Bielski, which is, I write about Tovia in the book Yam Suf, because I just thought it was a fascinating story when I looked at. Did you ever see that movie Defiance, John?
Yes, I did see it. I did see it.
Defiance.
Yeah.
Defiance. Okay. The movie Defiance, Ed Zwick was the director of this movie. And we know Daniel Craig played the heroine, Tovia Bielski, and Liev Schreiber plays his brother. Well, I happen to know this family personally. And Michael Bielski is a very dear friend, which is Tovia Bielski's eldest son. And one of the things that I found fascinating, and just in our private conversations, is after the war, and he goes back home to Israel, Tovia, this is right before the War of Independence in 1948, but they're beginning to form militias to be able to prepare for this battle. And Tovia runs into the strangest thing that he never thought would happen. He's there, and there was rivalries between family names, the Jewish family names that were from Europe, that were well-to-do people that were vying for the power. There was a power struggle, even amongst the Jewish people. And in one place he's told, look, if anyone goes past this line, and this was coming up out of Tel Aviv, he told his commander tells him, he says, you kill them. I don't care if they're Jews or what, you kill them. Nobody comes past this line here. And Tovia says, look, I just spent the last 5 years of my life rescuing Jewish people. I didn't care who they were, where they were from. I rescued over 1,200 Jewish people, not just my family, but anybody I could find that I could rescue. And you're telling me to kill my own people over this? He says, no way, I have no part of this. And he was a tremendous military commander. He would have made an awesome military commander. But what was it? Already, behind the scenes, people like Shimon Peres's family, etc. Shimon Peres was in his own autobiography, writes that he went to a Jesuit school when he lived in Poland. He was a Jesuit trained, and so now it's obvious that that side of Zionism was the evil side that is the bad side. But the good side of Zionism are the people that truly wanted to come home and be a part of all of this. So, but the conflict, though, John, when we look at the actual conflict itself, it seems to be that the Jewish people are fighting the Muslim people, whether it's the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Iranians, the Syrians, what have you. But in the background, this is the Vatican who's causing every war to be waged and causing every conflict. And we see clearly, and I don't mean to say take this in a biblical standpoint, but Daniel mentions in his prophecies that prince that shall come comes up strong with a small people. And that's your Palestinians. And they're playing that card. And the sad thing is, John, the majority of the Palestinians are not like the radical group. It's the same thing with the Zionists. The political Zionists are there to basically hand the Vatican East Jerusalem on a platter so that they can go live some luxurious life over in Italy or Greece or something like that. This is the type thing that is the evil side of it. This is the part that is the bad Zionism. And this is why you see Shimon Peres as president of Israel now. Even though, it's funny, he never got out of the limelight. The Oslo Accords were a joke. While the Oslo Accords were going on, the Vatican was signing their covenant with Israel. In fact, that's another interesting thing. Why is it that in 1975, the Vatican recognizes the PLO as a state, but they don't even consider Israel as a state until 1993 when Shimon Peres comes and promises to hand them all the territories that they demanded. And by the way, when I say demanded, what the Vatican did, they sent over a group of bishops to meet with the rabbinical leaders of Israel. And they made it clear, either you give us back the lands that we occupied during the Turkish Empire. They didn't say Turkish Empire, but that's what they're talking about. The lands that they were allowed to have when the Turks were ruling over this area. Either you give us back all these lands, which includes the Temple Mount, includes the Wailing Wall, East Jerusalem, it includes Bethlehem, it includes up in Nazareth, many places that the Jews do not want to have to hand back. They said, if you do not hand us back this land, we cannot guarantee the safety of you nor your families. I mean, that was just flat out. And the Wailing Wall, the reason why the Wailing Wall is so sacred to the Jewish people, it's a division, John, between rabbinical teachings. Some groups in Israel, it's kind of like the Christian people, it's like different organizations in Judaism. Some believe that we should not go to the Temple Mount until Messiah comes. Some believe that we should restore the temple and we should start back temple worship immediately. That this is the hour, this is the call, that until we start the temple worship, God will not come. But the Wailing Wall is actually made up from some of the original stones that made the temple 2,000 years ago. And so to the Jewish people, it's the closest they can get to the Holy of Holies that once stood in the temple. In fact, there's a place that goes right up underground that puts you more in line to where the Holy of Holies once stood. And this is where the Jews try to get so they can get to the closest place to the Holy of Holies. So the Wailing Wall for them is extremely sacred right now.
I got you. Now, let me ask you. Now, Steve, let me ask you this.
Because of the threat of them losing this, it was actually yeah.
I'm sorry. We got a big old delay here. Let me ask you this: what is the wailing part of the Wailing Wall? Why is it called that?
It's called the Wailing Wall, John, because of the mourning of the Jewish people because of being in the diaspora for the last 2,000 years, for wandering all this time. Is the reason why it's called the Wailing Wall. It's where the Jews, when they have come back, they come and they weep and they cry. So it's called the Wailing Wall.
All right. You know, this is the thing that's absolutely fascinating to me, and it's probably about as simplistic a wonderment as can possibly be. I don't understand. It's so much happened in that region of the world, that small area of the world, that, I mean, it's just undeniable. And I don't understand, you know, people say, oh, you know, the Jews, they run the banks. Oh, the Jews, they run all of the mass media. They're in control of this. They run the diamond trade. They run everything. It's like, in fact, on the program that I was formerly associated with, I would anytime something wrong happened in the Middle East, I would say, okay, can we say it now? It's the Jews, you know, which is really being critical of those people who immediately sing out with that. But it's just beyond comprehension almost that they have been so persecuted. I mean, I can't think of any group on earth that has suffered anywhere near that level of persecution. And just address that when we go back to you on camera. And also the part about, let's see, in 49, Israel became recognized as its own state. But it took until 93 before what? Just recap that. I know it started in 49. Then you mentioned something about 1975, I want to say, and then 1993. Would you mind giving us that again?
Absolutely, John. The part about 1993 and 1975, it actually has a much greater significance, and I'll touch a little bit on that as well, and then we'll look into some of the other questions that you were speaking about. In 75, this is when the PLO had become recognized by the Vatican, and they had started relations with the Palestinians, which is PLO's Palestinian Liberation Organization. But the Vatican refused to accept any type of recognition for Israel as a state, or existed as a state, or anything. It was like that until 1993. I mean, you're looking at 40 plus years. Israel has already been a state. They're recognized by the United Nations, but the Vatican refuses to recognize them. Now, ironically, Russia did the exact same thing. Russia recognized the PLO back in the early 70s as well, just like the Vatican did. In fact, and that's why I say it's much deeper when we begin to really look at this, this is the reason why we see recently that Abbas goes to Russia and begins to negotiate already, not even officially a state as far as from dividing the lands or any of that nature there, but there is no quote-unquote two-state solution. But because he has been guaranteed already that this is going to be done, he goes to Vladimir Putin, and I forget the name of the oil company there, John, but they negotiated and signed an agreement for the gas rights in both off the coast of Gaza and also on the mountains of Judea and Samaria. Now, Judea and Samaria is actually under Israeli control. And then people talk about the Gog and Magog war written in the Tanakh. This is what will ignite that type of war there. Because here Israel is sitting back, and they're seeing these type of negotiations go on. And really and truly, John, the only reason why I believe that they're pressing for this two-state solution is because if Israel does not agree to two states, and Israel can get a hold of the natural gas and the oil that is in both these regions, which really belong to Israel. When I say it belongs to Israel, we have to go, in a case like this, John, we have to go back to the British mandate that had already laid out, there was a map drawn out by the British mandate before 1948 that guaranteed that Israel would get so much land and that this would be a home for the Jewish people. That included everything that we consider to be modern-day Israel today, even over into Jordan. A lot of people don't realize when the British mandate was done, John, that Jordan was not even a country. You know, you just had a bunch of Bedouins that were dwelling in the desert. It's the same thing with the Palestinians. The PLO only becomes an organization or a push for a quote-unquote state when they raised up Arafat. They raised up Arafat to give the PLO a name, to give the people a name of the Palestinians. Now, the Vatican, to this day, not just 1993, to this day, never refer in any of their documentation to the state of Israel. They always refer to the land that Israel is in as as Palestine or the Holy Land, things of this nature here, which only shows that even though, quote unquote, that the Vatican has now signed somewhat diplomatic relations with Israel, they're just doing it in words but not in real action. Because they won't acknowledge Israel as a state. They still hold Israel in that area as Palestine. And my gosh, all the different things that can be said about that. Now, you had another question, John. What was that other question?
Well, I think a better question is, Now, Israel became a state in 48. Is that correct?
Yes, 1948.
Okay, 48. I was off a year. All right. Well, who decided, okay, let's make Israel a state again? Who did that following World War II, and why did they do it?
The British were actually in control of the territory. After the British had conquered the Turks and they had taken control of this whole region, they had all the territory. When Hitler rose to power, which there's so much evidence that shows the Vatican's little grubby hands in his background as well. In fact, Hitler makes a statement. He said, "I am only going to finish the work that the Vatican began, and that is to wipe off the face of the earth the Christ killers." That's the way that Hitler put it. And he said, so it should not be anything strange to you that I'm going to finish the work that the Vatican has already started. But when the Jews, after the Holocaust was over and Hitler had been defeated by the Americans and by the Russians, the Jewish people then were trying to get in, but Britain began to even block that, John. This was terrible. You know, they were only allowing so many new immigrants per day to come into that land. So the only way that the Jewish people knew that they would be able to get a state born was they started off by doing small campaigns against the British people to make the British people want to leave. So they were constantly fighting with them. And then once the British pulled out and Israel in 1948 declared themselves a nation, that's when the Arab world turned against them. And they, of course, they were outnumbered, unbelievable, the numbers that were against the Jewish people. But they overcame, and they won their war of independence. And that's when Israel basically controlled from the north of Gaza, what was known as Gaza today, which is just south of Tel Aviv, all the way up through Herzliya, north of Haifa and Herzliya, in that area up there on the coastline there. It wasn't until the Six-Day War that we captured the Golan, we captured Jerusalem. Actually, we captured the West Bank. Everything was captured, but they ended up making Israel give that back. As Benjamin Netanyahu said recently in an interview, they were asking him about Israel's wars being so short. He said, "We know that when we go to war, there's a lot of political pressure in the background." He said, "We have it, so do the nations that come against us have it. And we have only a matter of hours or a few days to bring that to an end. So we try to do as much as we can in that little bitty time that we have." But you have the flip side of that too, John, and that is they have there's a term coined for this. It's called genos. Genos are the Jews in name only. Those are your Zionists that are there to basically not to do good for the Jewish people, but they're Jews in name only because they're there to basically divide the land. And that is something that the Jesuit order has always been very deeply involved in. The Vatican has used the Jesuits as a secret military service. And by the way, anybody knows this, it's very public knowledge, that the largest intelligence gathering organization in the world is in the Vatican. And they work with Interpol, they work with CIA, they even work with Mossad, they work with all the great intelligence agencies around the world. It'll blow your mind away, the things that they do there.
I understand they've got a pretty nice bank, too.
Oh, yes. John, the Vatican has the wealth of the world, whether it be gold or whatever. Even the commodities of gold that they have in the Vatican is unbelievable. It surpasses anything that we have. And this has been a stated fact based on analysis that have been done. Or what you can see, that they have more gold in the different statues and things throughout the Vatican and Vatican City there than Fort Knox has altogether, which I kind of wonder if we even have any gold in Fort Knox anymore. Especially after we sent Germany some melted down gold and tell them they have to wait till 2020 to get their gold. So, and that's another issue too, John. Me and you, we talked a little bit about this a little while back. I said a little while back, just a few days ago, in fact. Um, I've got friends that work for the White House. And I'm not talking about janitors either. I'm talking about people that know things that are going on. I was told back in November that they had changed some rules there and how they were to deal with the public and to be prepared for some things that may come down in this country very soon. I've been told that that the United States is preparing for a financial collapse, and that they're being trained for that purpose. And now this is somewhat speculation on my part, but there's some people that know a lot more than I do that has concurred this as a possibility as well. But I have wondered, let me say it like this, John, they can collapse the economy anytime they want. And the whole purpose for collapsing the United States economy is because we are the Federal Reserve, we are the standard for the entire world, but it's to usher in a new world order. The only way to bring in the new world order is to collapse the economy, or at least bring the economy to its knees, to where the politicians from around the world are forced to accept the agreement that the Vatican makes in backing up the world currencies. Now, if Israel gets their hands, or could get their hands on the natural resources that are there in their lands now and not make a two-state agreement, Israel would no longer have need of the financial backing that she receives from the United States and from the wealthy Jews of this country. And so I have a feeling, and this is just speculation on my part, but it looks like it would give a perfect opportunity for them to possibly push the button to collapse this economy, to force Israel into making this agreement with the Palestinians. That's how bad the Vatican wants Jerusalem. And there is numerous sources. I mean, whether you take Barry Chamish, there's actually, and I don't, let's see, maybe I have this other, but I don't have the other lady's name in front of me. There's an Israeli journalist that I have spoken with as well, that is just a wealth of knowledge. And she has really picked up on the Vatican conspiracy to topple Israel, to bring Israel to their knees because of their desire to get a hold of East Jerusalem using the Palestinians, only to turn on both the Palestinians and the Jews. And you know, John, in history, I mean, history is always supposed to be a rule of thumb for us. That's exactly what happened, not 2,000 years ago. We're talking about back before the Maccabees, when the Jewish people were constantly getting beat up by the Arab world. It wasn't an Islamic world either, by the way, at that time. There was no Muhammad. There was no Muhammad the prophet that never prophesied nothing. It was just simply the Arabic world. And they were constantly being attacked, whether it be the Egyptians or the Syrians. And so the Jewish people back around 160 BC, they decided that they would go to the Romans and ask for their help for peace and safety, so that if they had any problems with the different, whether it be Syria or whether it be the Egyptians or whatever, that maybe try to come in and conquer them, that they could make an alliance with them for safety. All you have to do is go back and read history, John, and then begin to think about what John Kerry keeps trying to push down the throat of the Jewish people, that you're going to be safer than you ever were. Like with the Iranians. We got the Iranians in check. No, they're not going to make no bombs. Don't worry, Mr. Netanyahu. You don't have to worry about them. Everything's going to be cool. We got it all under control. All you have to do is sign this two-state solution. We'll bring peace into your land. But back 2,200 years ago, when the Romans did come in, what did Israel face then? Israel, as it came in, looked like it was a good thing, only to have them totally turn on them. They made them to stop all of their beliefs. They could no longer worship the way they wanted. They couldn't worship on their Sabbath day. They had to eat. They were no longer allowed to keep the laws that God had instituted for the Jewish people. They couldn't keep kosher. Now, if people don't see the writing on the wall, I mean, recently, Pope Francis sends out a statement or a decree. He first starts it in Italy, then it goes to the EU for a vote, then it went to the United States, is being considered now in the United States, and as well Israel received it and is also considering it. that Sunday will now become a day of Sabbath, a day of rest, and that even businesses will not be permitted to conduct business. Now, that may seem like a good thing if you're just looking at it from maybe a Christian perspective, but the problem is with this. If that's what's happening in the beginning, and they don't even, and this new system is not set up, this new world order is not set up, how many more laws is the Vatican going to make once they come in? And what is really going to be the true peace and safety of Israel with a two-state solution? There's not going to be one, John. Iran is going to make their nuclear bomb if they don't already have it. And I know that Netanyahu keeps saying that he may have to go at this alone, but I don't believe it's going to happen. I believe that they're going to divide the land, and when they do, then Russia is going to come down to get the oil and the natural resources that's being promised to them by the Palestinian people. And I think that's when you're going to have a major conflict explode in the Middle East. That's when Israel will have to say enough is enough.
And so that makes sense. That makes complete sense, because even with this deal in Syria, Russia said, no, don't go into Syria. We're going to have to take action. And Putin's got, military aircraft parked all over the place over there. They got a Navy base there. And it's
yes.
No, don't take any action against Iran. I mean, seriously, doesn't Russia have enough oil reserves up there in their well, it's a frozen tundra, but it seems to me that Russia's selling a lot of oil even to Western Europe. So I don't get this, Steve. I don't understand. Why does Russia want anything to do with that? I mean, they haven't been very. I mean, Russians are great people, but they haven't been real successful in any of their wars, with the exception of World War II. And we were coming in from the West, and they were coming in from the East. And look what happened in Stalingrad. So why is Russia meddling effectively? I mean, they claim that we're meddling, and we know that Putin he's Orthodox Roman Catholic, isn't he? So, I mean, is this what this is all about? Is the Vatican connection one of those tentacles reaches to Russia's Putin? This is extraordinarily complicated. I can barely track with it because, I like to say, throw a bunch of dots up on the canvas, and we get enough dots up there, you can begin to connect them and draw a picture. But as it is now, wow, it's beginning to look like a kaleidoscope. I mean, this is unbelievable. But it appears that Rome, or specifically the Vatican, is the center dot from which all the lines are drawn.
John, that's exactly right. And, ironically, there's only two people that stand between me and Putin. I've got a good friend of mine that his best friend is Putin's best friend. I used to always make a little joke with him. I said, look, if things get really bad, I said, probably the safest place would be somewhere in the middle of Russia. But in all joking aside about it, it is a major complex puzzle. And it almost, I've been accused of pontificating the Torah. But in reality, though, John, what we're dealing with, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. Watch what's happening on the news every single day. I mean, look at the covers of all the major magazines recently, including Rolling Stone, Time Magazine, Life Magazine. Why is Pope Francis' picture being plastered all over the world? Why has this man become such a charismatic person that every fashion of life is being accepted? We have Pope Benedict, he kisses the Quran. Now I realize that this is the Muslim people's holy book, but the thing is the oddity that he would do so being a Roman Catholic, unless there's some connection in there. So when we look at Russia, as you said, him being a Russian Orthodox Catholic man himself, he is let me just put it this way. As we watch the news clips, and recently I was watching a lot of different news clips, John, that they were bringing out how that just watch the news on a regular basis. Every world leader keeps going to the Vatican. It's like, for example, when John Kerry, they announced that the the 9-month negotiations. It starts over in the United States. Well, before you know it, it's over in Rome. They're having negotiations. And I know it jumps back and forth in different places, but we have Abbas going to the Pope. We have Netanyahu going to the Pope. We have John Kerry going to the Pope. We have Barack Obama that goes to the Pope. Vladimir Putin had to go to the Pope. The Iranians sent their first diplomatic envoy to the Pope with his credentials just right before they agreed to do the negotiate, or before they come to an agreement with Iran to ease the sanctions. Then we have the Syrian president recently. He sends to the Pope his conditions to bring this civil war to an end. And everywhere, every leader of the world, all the way down, John, what really blew me away is when I began to see tribal leaders. You can find it easily on old news clips and stuff on the internet. But when Benedict was Pope, he had tribal leaders coming to him and bowing down, as well as every representative of every major denominational Christian organization from America, and as well recently for Pope Francis, all the leaders from Europe as well. They're all coming to the Vatican. Now, if the Vatican is not calling the shots around this world to the majority of the people in the world, then why are all these world leaders have to go to him? And so when I look at the situation with Vladimir Putin and him, like you said, you brought up the fact, does he not have enough oil in the tundra? They have so much oil and natural gas, it's not even funny. They could not exhaust what they wanted in the next 100 years if they wanted to. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, like you brought up, John, is what is the interest in this little country and this particular place? And the only thing that I can figure is that you have to look, when you look at the Vatican and the way the Vatican conducts business and the things that they do, they don't base things based on what just happened in the last 2 or 3 years. They look back, John, and they base things that happened 50, 100 years ago. So undoubtedly, there's something that Russia has done that has won that favor to give them the rights to go down there and do what they're doing. The United States is just another puppet in the game as well. I know a lot of people, they like to blame Barack Obama, and I've heard people say, well, he's the Antichrist, he's that, he's this, he's that. You know, to me, Barack Obama is just a pawn in the game. When he came in and he took over the U.S. economy, or, you know, as president, he has to deal with the economy. He got it in a mess in the first place. You know, now, him and his Obama health care plan is just going to help push everything over the edge. Why? They need somebody to blame. But look who's behind him. The real president is not Barack Obama. The real president is Joe Biden in the background, the Catholic Jesuit that is in the White House. And every president in the United States that's ever come against the Vatican in any way, whether it be Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, who was Catholic himself, was assassinated by Jesuits.
All right. I'll tell you what, Steve, this is unbelievable. That is an extraordinary place to leave off for 5 minutes of break so you can freshen your tea, get a drink of water, and then let's come back and let's do some more. That's an extraordinary point. Let's pick up with that when we come back. Let's make sure to do that, because you don't cross the Vatican. It's just not done. And then I want to talk to you about financial collapse and what's your opinion of what the New World Order will look like, and whether or not Iran will eventually attack Israel, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Listen, Rabbi Steve Ben Denoon, thanks so much for being with us. You know, folks, no matter what your disposition is, and no matter what your attitude is toward these events, we are all in a position now where we think we know, but we don't. We think we know what we're talking about, but we don't. So the only thing that we can do is keep talking, because it's just like the bullies, when the two main bullies on the school ground, well, let's not even call them bullies. Let's just say two antagonists on a schoolyard. They'll talk for a while, but then as long as they keep talking, everything will be fine. But when they stop talking, that's when this happens. And really, it's to no one's benefit that we do this. So let's take a little break, and we'll come right back with Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon. I call him Steve because I know him. This is Caravan of Midnight. Stand by for more. All right, we're visiting with Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon, and he is a biblical scholar and a former resident of Israel and author of a couple of really good books. And we'll give you his website and the names of those books. You may be interested in them, but let's keep our momentum going here. When we left off, he was drawing the picture, and in that picture are the similarities between the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and also John Kennedy. And so let's let him amplify that and just carry on. Rabbi Steve, go ahead, let her rip.
Thank you, John, very much. And of course, we know this is not just limited. Anyone that wanted to do some research, practically every president that we've ever had assassinated, there's been a Jesuit involvement for one reason or another. I don't think John Hinckley with Reagan was really one, but nonetheless, there's always some kind of diabolical thing going on in the background. Looking at Abraham Lincoln first, seeing as he goes back to the further part there, we owe, or we're indebted to a man known as Father Chinnicky. And Father Chinnicky wrote in an autobiography about his relationship with the President Abraham Lincoln when he knew him, how he got to know him, etc. And Father Chinnicky later left the Catholic Church, but he was always an outspoken priest at that time. And he was a bishop, and he ran into some type of legal issue with the church, and he looked for representation, and no one would take his case except Abraham Lincoln. He finally found Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, he wasn't president at the time, but he agreed to take his case, and he won his case. During that time, though, they really became good friends. Abraham Lincoln, of course, later he becomes president of the United States, and they continued to maintain their friendship. In one such interview, and I happen to have one little book before me. I want to read something to you in just a second. But Abraham Lincoln said to Father Chinnicky, he said, you know, and he was facing the crisis of the Civil War, and he said to Father Chinnicky, he says, the good old Southern boys, he said, though they be Bible thumpers, he said, there's one thing I can count on with them. He said, though I may differ with them and they may differ with me, they will come out and they will fight me on a battlefield, man to man. He said, but it's not so with the Catholic Church. He said, the Vatican will take, and one day they will kill me. He said, they will slit my throat from ear to ear, and they will take and they will burn my wife alive. He said, and they will do it when no one's looking. And it's interesting that he says that, because the Jesuit oath, and this is, we have, Chuck Missler used to always say, he says, we're indebted to so-and-so. Alberto Rivera, who was a former Jesuit for 27 years in the Roman Catholic Church and studied at the Vatican under oh gosh, I forget his name is B, but I can't think of his position. He was not an archbishop, higher than that, next in line to be the Pope. But anyway, there was an oath that every Jesuit must take, and that oath reads like this here. Whatever, let's see. There we go. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own. This is what by the way, this is the exact same oath, what I'm going to read to you here, that Pope Francis took when when he became a Jesuit, which the Jesuit order is basically like the secret police of the Vatican, which we mentioned, I think, in the first part of the series. But this is the oath they take. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own or any mental reservation, whatever, even as a corpse or a cadaver, but will unhesitantly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make a wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and the wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race, that when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulation cord, the steel of the pointed or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at time may be directed to do so by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith of the Society of Jesus. This oath was published in 1883, and this was what was revealed by the former Jesuit priest Alberto Rivera. And John, let me just say one thing, though, and this is for the sake of the Catholic people that might even be listening tonight, because even in our own broadcast on YouTube, we have many Catholic people that tune in and listen to our broadcast and stuff. I always like to make it a point, whether it be Catholic, Protestants, Jewish people, because there's the wicked side on every group that there is, but there's a lot of good people that are in these organizations that have no clue what's going on at the top. And that's the sad thing. But they don't have any clue. And this may be one of the only times that this ever comes out for them. And they can easily research these things. Even in the in the Vatican's own writings, in their own publications, in their own newspapers and stuff, you will find their opinions published very openly, even in modern times. This is not just some ancient document that is still done. Alberto Rivera says that when he was a Jesuit, he actually had to say this oath when he became a Jesuit. And that was probably around 1940 when he was taking the oath himself. And he said it was still active when he left, and that was in the 70s when he left the order, that all Jesuits that came in were still taking this oath. So when he was there, it was still happening. But the average Catholic person that goes to their Mass every week faithfully, that are trying to be good people, have no clue of these things. Have no idea, John, that these things are going on. Now looking at, and a good example of that would be John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. His assassination was ordered by the Catholic Church because he was not going along with the program that was set before him to do. John F. Kennedy was trying to do good for the nation. And as a result, it cost him his life. And then when his brother Robert, and by the way, one of the reasons, let me just say this too, some of the reasons why this was happening. Robert Kennedy, for example, had when he was he was the chief prosecutor for the United States, he had declared war on the mafia and upon organized crime. And all these things are things that are going on in the background that should be permitted and left alone. But they were trying to clean up this country and make it a better country for the people. And this is not what the Vatican had in mind. And by the way, according to Alberto Rivera, the way that they would know the United States had been conquered by the Jesuits to be handed back over to the Vatican would be when a president would take his oath facing an obelisk. And the first president to ever face that obelisk and take his oath was none other than Ronald Reagan. And they totally changed his inauguration, facing toward the obelisk. It's right there in Washington, D.C., the Washington Monument there that everybody sees. Same obelisk that sits right there in St. Peter's Square in Rome, Italy, that is a pagan symbol. And ironically, it is Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II that formed what they called the Holy Alliance. It was published in Time magazine. I forget which year that was, John, but it was published in Time magazine. I read the article. I used to actually have the whole thing saved in a little folder there. But they worked together to break the Soviet Union, which my wife was a part of the Soviet Union, and she was there when the Soviet Union collapsed. And they called it a Holy Alliance. And the two men believed, because both of them had suffered an assassination attempt, that they had a holy alliance between them and a purpose that they believed was driven by God to be able to break the Soviet Union. And of course, they were successful in doing so. But if you ever look back, though, and I actually did this myself, I did the research on this, every cabinet minister that Ronald Reagan had was an Orthodox Roman Catholic.
Is that right?
Even though he wasn't.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Well, you know, that was the wording in that oath for the Jesuits, was actually quite strong. I mean, it's a little bit too strong. I mean, it sounds like something that the Skull and Bones Club might recite. All this stuff about bashing babies' heads and it sounded like they were talking about, well, eviscerating people and setting people on fire and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I don't understand. I understand if you read the Bible, you're going to find out, you're going to get the idea that, well, the Lord likes a good fight every once in a while. He's certainly not squeamish about that, but that seems a bit strong. So you're saying that the Jesuits are actually the muscle end of the Vatican. Yeah?
That is correct, John. And the Skull and Bones, the Secret Society of the Skull and Bones, is very much similar to the Jesuits, and it is controlled by the Jesuits as well. And in fact, George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. were both members of the Skull and Bones Society. I mean, there is enough documentation to prove that, and of course, there's many others as well. I mean, you take. There is so many things. If I had just laid out the documentation, and we can do this in the future, when it comes to looking at the politicians in this country and what they're doing, it'll blow your mind away. And then this is why we find with George Bush, when he was president, George Walker Bush, that is, he's the one that we first hear that words come out of his mouth, that you hear over and over on the internet, that we are preparing for a new world order. And that's what's on the horizon. They have been planning this for years now, for decades. And we're just coming to the place now where the New World Order is about to take place. We're on the how would you call it, the edge of this.
The eve.
Absolutely.
And what will it look like, Steve? What will just looking into your crystal ball, which it may work a little better than mine. I usually get snow on it, but what will the New World Order look like for us?
Yes. I'll tell you what I believe in. And I say this, John, but I say it also, that listeners may know. I'm not a prophet. I can't prophesy these things and say this is going to be that way. I look at these things from the best that I can tell from, for me being a rabbi, I take it from a biblical perspective as well to try to determine why are these things happening and what is going to be in for the future. When I have really looked at the New World Order, there's a lot of people that think that when the New World Order sets in, total chaos just sets in, and there's no restoring of order. You get all kinds of doomsday scenarios that come with the New World Order. But personally, John, I believe that what's going to happen when they set in the New World Order, you're going to see chaos for probably a month, maybe a little bit longer, but then it's going to restore back to order. And that's when the New World Order will set in. Now, let me give you some specifics in what I'm seeing myself. Now, here's one thing. Let me just say this to kind of give you a little bit of insight on this, on some of the things that I actually have a little privy information on. A good friend of mine, and this was probably better than 10 years ago, probably about 12 years ago, he sits in the meetings at the Federal Reserve in up in New York. And I say New York, Washington, I forget where that's at, so forgive me if I got that wrong as far as New York or Washington, D.C., where this happens at. But I know his father personally, and we were discussing this issue one day. He said, look, his father was a very aged man at that time, in his 70s, so his son's like in his 50s. And he said, my son sits there in these meetings, and he said he comes back and he tells me the strangest thing that I've never been able to figure out is why we have to have a Vatican representative. There's always a representative there. Now, the one thing that they were talking about then, and this is, like I said, about 12 years ago, was that they were already talking about the New World Order. They were talking about the changing of the financial currency that we have now, that the U.S. dollar would totally go completely out of existence, and that they would bring in another form of a monetary system. And that form of monetary system would have something to do with one of the popes. And this was a young man that, even though his father was a minister, I don't know if he was religious himself. I don't think he was, but he was just kind of taken back by the way things were going on there. Now, another lady that I know personally that contacted me in our ministry that we have here worked for 4 years dealing with the banks of London and the United States and the Federal Reserve through a battle that she was going through with them. And her knowledge was just impeccable about what's going on. And as she put it to me, John, is that she said, people have no idea. She says, when you pay your taxes in the United States, your taxes go straight to England, and England sends those to the Vatican. And I'm like, this almost seems like a fairy tale. I'm like, are you serious? And she said, you have no idea what they're doing, do you? And I said, you're telling me that the American people, when they pay their taxes, that money just changes hands and ends up somewhere else. She said, Stephen, the United States currency is the Federal Reserve of the world. She said, but right now, if Russia or China, either one, decides to cash in the bonds that they're holding in the United States, or if they were to take and decide to buy the oil from OPEC using gold versus currency, this nation would fold in like nothing, because the U.S. dollar has no backing, because all that gold has been sent slowly but surely to the Vatican. And this is also why Germany, when they recently asked for their gold back, that was supposed to be in Fort Knox, the United States sends them an IOU and says you can't get it back till 2020. Now, they did ship them some gold, but it was melted down gold. Wasn't even, and they're like, why did you melt the gold down? And they had some bogus excuse. But, so, I mean, this is, the New World Order, what I believe is really going to happen, though, they've got to collapse the economy in order to get the New World Order to work. And this is one reason why I think the spending is just continually going out of control. Every economist out there, John, will tell you, and you know this better than I do, there is no way we can ever pay down the national debt. It is in the trillions of dollars. There's not enough money on the planet Earth, as they say, to pay it down. So what better thing to do than to collapse it all and then start over? And then the Vatican comes in, because the Vatican this is not a secret anymore. This is not something in the back closet any longer. The Vatican has said publicly that they want to be the bankers of the New World Order, and that there would be one banking system. Now, of course, they've tried to blame, back in 2007, they tried to blame it all on the Jews, what was happening there with the housing market and the bubble that blew up on that. But no one wants to tell you that these Jewish bankers that got the blame for everything were being forced by the administrations, the U.S. administrations at that time, Bill Clinton, Bush, and them were forcing them to make bad loans that they knew the people could never pay back. They were forced to lower their credentials for minorities and to put out just billions of dollars in debts that would never be able to be paid back.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And they made it so.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, that's true. It even hit the news that they were being pressured to do these things, and that there would be huge ramifications of the negative type if they did not make these loans, fully knowing that it was impossible for these loans to be serviced.
That's exactly right, John. And
yeah.
You know what that is, though, John? It's a repeat of what Hitler did. And so Hitler used the Protocols of Zion that was a forged document that was never written by Jews. It was actually written by Jesuits, and there is documentation to prove who did that. And that's, I think I actually even know who blew that cover on that. I thought I had it laid out in front of me here, but I don't. But there is, oh yes, it was Leo Lehman. He was an actual Irish Catholic priest. He's the one that blew the whistle on that the Vatican had actually forged those documents. And that it was never Jewish people that wrote the Protocols of Zion. And by the way, for the viewers that may not know what the Protocols of Zion are, that was what Hitler used to try to go against the Jewish people, because the Protocols of Zion was basically, in essence, trying to say that the Jews wanted to take over the world. The Jews have not wanted to take over the world. Now, do they not? I mean, we have what we call I'll say that there. But the thing is, Jewish people, they try to make money, yes, like anybody else does. But we have poor Jewish people just as well as we have rich Jewish people. And in the case there with Hitler, he was doing the same thing to the Jews there. He was blaming all the economic woes of Germany upon the Jews as a scapegoat. And, of course, the Vatican was fueling this for him. You know, Hitler was funded by the United States as well as England, which that was the Vatican forcing all that issue as well. But what's really interesting in that as well, when Hitler collapsed, when he was defeated by the Americans and by the Russian armies there, and the Vatican takes and hides, oh gosh, I forget the number on it now, John, but they actually brought out of Germany, Hitler included, by the way. Hitler never committed suicide. That is nothing but a myth to try to keep people off track. But the Vatican harbored them, hid them by the hundreds. I think it was like I can't remember if it was 1,600 or 16,000 Nazi war criminals were smuggled out by the Vatican and taken to South America to live a life of luxury for the rest of their lives. Which should be obvious to us. Why was there only one war criminal brought to trial in Israel for Holocaust crimes? I mean, that should stand for reason. Where are the rest of them at? But anyway, getting back though, John, to the New World Order.
That's a really good point, Steve. Every once in a while they come up with one, and where are all the rest of them?
Exactly. I mean, you would think that would stand to reason, because Israel naturally would want to bring them to justice. At least the Jewish people that suffered under their hands. I mean, I know many Jews that were in the Holocaust and the things they suffered. In fact, a good friend of mine is Peter Thomas, the famous. Peter was actually he's a narrator for PBS, also for the Forensic Files. He's a narrator voice on there. Peter lives down here close to me, and we became very good friends when I met Peter, and we've done one radio show together. Just was awesome. Peter liberated the Nordhausen camp during World War II, and he tells the most heartbreaking story of what he went through. And he told me, he said, Steve, I was trained to kill people. I did it. I was in that war. I took many lives myself as a soldier. He said, but when I came there to the Nordhausen camp, he said, we were not prepared for what we were about to see. And he said, we were so horrified. He said, to this day, I still have nightmares about what those Jewish people were going through. I said, I'll never forget walking up to one man. He takes me by the hand. He said, he's just a frail man. And he says to me, God bless you for liberating them. He says, I go down, I'm trying to do my job. He said, I'm having a very difficult time. The stench of the dying bodies, he said, people were dropping dead everywhere. He said, I come back up no more than 5 minutes later, and the man's laying dead on the ground. And he said, that has so hit me so bad, mentally throughout his life. He said the anguish that I've suffered to see just what the Jewish people suffered during the Holocaust. Something that the Iranians deny, something that so many people have said, especially the Palestinians as well, that there's no truth to it. It's all a lie. It's like with my own family. My mother's side of the family, we can hardly find no one. They were the Colemans, they were the Heinrich families of Europe. In the Colemans, more than 1,000 names on the Yad Vashem. So many of the Jews were just wiped out as a result. But anyway, not to get off track, let me go right back, John, to the New World Order and set up a little stage for that. There's a lot of people, John, they talk about the mark of the beast and being a microchip implant. Now, there's a lot of people that may not know, but in Obama's healthcare plan that he built, the Obamacare, one of the clauses in that requires that everyone that has Obamacare must be microchipped. Now, because there was a lot of opposition that came up against that, they suspended that for 1 year and 1 year only. But it still lays in there. It still will be brought back up. I'm not an advocate to say that a microchip is the mark of the beast, but I do believe that it'll be something that will facilitate the mark of the beast, so to speak. I'm more inclined to say that it's not, simply because if you look at it from a biblical perspective, everybody that takes the mark of the beast, God's judgment is final for that person. And I can't see myself, John, if a child is given a microchip, that God would bring judgment on a child. I just don't believe that. So therefore, I don't think that it is a microchip, but I think that the microchip is going to facilitate the way they control the world at that time. Now, it may not be a microchip. They've got all kinds of new ways of scanning things. But that's a different opinion there. But what I do believe is going to happen is once the economy has collapsed, and the United States, and they have to do it here like that, John, because this country is armed to the hilt. And right now they have over 400,000 Russian troops on American soil ready, and already been taught English, ready to step up for civil unrest. That was part of the United Nations mandate that Barack Obama signed, brought the Russian troops in. They were stationed in California. Now they finished their training. They've been moved into different parts of the United States, waiting for a collapse in society here, where they would be used to deal with the more problemed areas where our military would not be willing to do. But once the dust settles, then things are going to actually seem to go back to normal. And I think that's going to be the biggest deception there is, John, is that the people are going to think, after the dust settles, the Catholic Church will come in there with their gold, their money. They will back the U.S. economy then and the rest of the world's economy under this new world order, and then people and businessmen are going to thrive. They're going to start to do well again. And I think that's why, when you look at the Christian people that write that's written in their Bible, that talks about this great horror that gets destroyed later, and the merchants of the earth mourn over her death. And the reason they do is because, to me, that's what tells me that this New World Order is going to be a huge financial upsurge for the wealthy and for those that have. The rest of us, the poor guy, is still going to be the poor guy, but you're going to be serving the system. And this is where they will force, when it says you can't buy or sell, saving you take this mark, or in this case, saving that you are part of this New World Order, that comes down to the way they set up the rules. And I've always used the analogy, John, of a banker. If you have a loan with a certain bank for your mortgage for your house, and suddenly someone else buys that mortgage out, then there's a whole new set of rules. Now, most cases in our society today, you don't have to go out and go to that other institution and sign a bunch of new contracts with them. It's just automatically done because when you signed your contract originally with your house, you may not have saw the small print, but you got sold out to somebody else. You automatically have to go by their rules. That's the way the New World Order is going to work in itself. And they've already been implementing things steadily as we're going. When I say they've been implementing things, what the Vatican is doing now is setting rules and guidelines, and the United States is falling into them already. Whatever they tell Barack Obama that he must do, he's doing. And he's doing because if he don't do it, they'll assassinate him and get another president in, and they will do it. And that's happening all around the world. Who would have ever thought? People say they'll never disarm the United States. Yes, they will. They said that about Australia. Australians, you know, there's a big hunting place over there like it is in the United States. They said they'll never disarm Australia. They did it with nearly without any hitches whatsoever. It took them, what, less than 30 days to disarm Australia? So it's coming here. But what the United States wants, and I know this from insiders in Washington, they need some type of civil unrest in order to declare martial law. When martial law is declared, that's when they're going to shut down the cities. They're going to stop you. You will not be able to leave. The cities will basically become ghettos. And if people don't think the Catholic Church is big in ghettos, all you got to do is go back and look at history. You know all the Jews, John, were kept in ghettos long before Hitler? You know that it was the Vatican that actually instituted the armband for the Jews, and they would color code them and everything and said that they were to be kept separated from the rest of society? I mean, this is just history. And they're going to take, and they're going to make that happen here in America. And it's not just the Jews that have to face this serious situation that's coming up now. This is also a situation that, as Obama has already made it quite clear in one of his own executive orders, is that the evangelicals of America also pose a threat and have become the #1 terrorist group, not the Muslims, you know. But then again, on that note, John, I have to say too, in some cases the Muslims have gotten a bad rap, although I'm not for them, but there's a major campaign that the Vatican has been trying to do to get attention diverted off of them. This is why they created Islam back in the early years there, was to get the attention off of them so no one would think that they're the bad guys on the street. And they created their Mahdi for the Muslims. It was never Muhammad that wrote the Quran. It was written by Jesuits. In fact, Muhammad was married to a Kaji who had given her life to the convent of that day for the Catholic Church. She was a super wealthy woman, 40 years old, and she marries this young man, 25 years old, Muhammad, at the pushing of the Catholic Church because they felt like he was the man that would help take and they could create a religion called Islam. Of course, it backfired on them a little bit because only the Sunnis stayed loyal to him and the Shiites, they hate the Vatican. And this is why you see all the different wars going on in the Middle East. This is why you've seen, for example, in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was in control, he was a Sunni. But then they caused Saddam Hussein to wage war against Iran, to have a civil war. Why? Because they wanted to kill off the Shiites, because Iranians are mostly Shiites. And so Saddam Hussein takes and puts all of his Shiite soldiers at the forefront, so the Shiites would kill the Shiites, because the Vatican wanted this, to get rid of the Muslims that didn't agree with them.
That's unbelievable. You know, we've even had people come on the program who have said, not this program, but other programs, all right, the radio program I'm no longer associated with, who just said, no, the Muslim Brotherhood was a Nazi construct. And now you're showing the connection between the Vatican and the Nazis. I mean, this is tough stuff, Rabbi. This is, I don't think a very large percentage of the world, let alone the American public, has ever heard such things.
You know, John, the thing is, there's a lot of information out there. But, you know, John, in a way, it's like culture shock. People that have grown up in whatever religion they're in, it's very difficult for them to say something's not right. And I think that's a wonderful thing that God judges a person by their heart and not by necessarily what they're affiliated with. But the problem is we're coming down to a time where affiliation is going to cost you your life. You know, what you do or what you don't do. When it comes to Islam being created by the Vatican, Alberto Rivera was probably the best insight for that, because he was shown personally, you know, the archives, the records of the creation of the Islamic religion. But, you know, there's simple things, though, too, John, that a person can easily begin to look at to start to realize, or at least to make you question, why are there so many similarities between those two faiths? Why do they both use beads to pray with? Why is it that they both use the crescent moon and the star, which is the crescent moon being the moon god, which the Muslim people call Allah, and the sun goddess, and yet the Vatican uses that, and so does the Muslim people in Islam. And the funny thing is, if you do the research, what's really interesting is there are websites where the Islamic people say, yes, we know that the crescent moon and the star is a pagan symbol, but we didn't start it. They say we got it from the Turks. You know, they try to blame it on the Turks. They say it was a pagan symbol that they used, and then it just kind of becomes synonymous with us, and that's why it's on all of our temples. Well, they had to have gotten it before the Turks, because the Vatican has always used it as well. But when you look at the fact that Muhammad actually marries an Orthodox Catholic girl, and she was a Muslim girl, Kaji was a Muslim girl, but she had joined in as a convert to the Catholic Church, and they thought she would be the right one to woo him in. Now, in her own words, once they began to groom him, they groomed him over in northern Africa. There, the bishops worked with him on teaching him and training him, but his own wife said that he became as if he was demon-possessed. And then what they did is they began to compile. He never wrote the Quran himself. It was compiled by Jesuit priests that compiled the Quran later. And this is why you'll find so many similarities between the Quran and not so much the Catholic Bible, because the Catholic Bible has a lot of similarities to what the Christian people would have in their Bible, or the Jewish people in the Tanakh. But it's the extra biblical parts that we find in, or that is found in the Catholic Bible, that you will find those same types of quotations in the Quran. And that's when you begin to start to realize, you know, common sense, I guess we could say, begins to play a big role in saying, you know, something's up here. They just didn't come in by chance. And as I've heard one guy say one time, he says, well, if two religions are very similar, then who do you think gave birth to who? Certainly not the one that come last. It's the one that come first. But yeah, there's a lot of information that can be gleaned, and most of that information is from people that were high up in the Vatican that have come out. And yeah, that is very interesting in how that works. But the sad thing is, John, is this stuff is not history either. This is things that are still going on to this day. It's like cloistered convents. Cloistered convents are still in existence to this day. But yet, they've been exposed. They've had nuns that have escaped those, and they've talked about the atrocities that are done to the nuns that go in there, and how yet the nuns that go in there innocently, really thinking they're doing a great thing.
Wow. And you know, there have been, you know, going back to this 450,000 Russian soldiers on our soil, just the other day, a guest on CTM said 250,000 Chinese soldiers. And then recently there were 600,000 magazines, you know, the banana magazines that that hold the 7.62 by 39 millimeter rounds, which are Chinese and primarily Chinese, because the Russians have gone to the other one, the AK-74 and even the AN-94. They use the 5.45 by 39.5 millimeter cartridge. But in any case, AK-47 is what uses, and its derivatives, is what uses the, these magazines that the Department of Defense ordered. They said there were so many of them, it would take, I don't know how many Globemaster aircraft of great big military transports to bring them all in. So, and these were for non-standard weapons and non-standard operations, I guess, is the unspoken part. So, I mean, there must be some sort of a reason they're bringing in AK magazines, right? And so the more I hear these things, and now to hear what Dr. Garrow said, and to read these things on various news sources, and then to hear what you have to say, it makes a pretty strong case for what you're saying just might be true. And what if it is? And we know that they're pushing for gun control. We know Mayor Bloomberg was secretly trying to organize gun confiscation, not just from New York, but from the entire United States. So I get the sense that they're really, really worried about an armed populace. Don't you find?
They do. And it's the biggest threat, John, that the U.S. government faces. And as far as the Chinese troops, I had heard the same thing about the Chinese troops being on American soil. Now, I have also heard, now this is from sources that I have in D.C., that here in the United States, in Florida especially, is where they have a contingency of Chinese troops down here, but they're actually kept on a base down here, and that Google has blurred the image that they had of the satellite image of that base because of the activity. Of course, we know Google is not live, live shots, but they do update them as it's declassified, given to them. But those areas are now considered blurred, where you can't tell anything that's going on. And I know for a fact also from the sources in D.C. that the Russian troops are here. And what was really ironic is that one source that I have there had a girlfriend of hers that called her that had no idea of any of this information, that lives in California, and was really troubled by a huge convoy that was all Russian in California. She didn't say where they were going to, but she calls up and she says, please tell me, I know you work at the White House, what in the world is going on? And they're preparing. I know that another thing that was kind of ironic, and was when back in D.C., John, when they had the black man that set himself on fire. And just think about that, and then think about the Arab Spring in Egypt when the man over there sets himself on fire. It's kind of ironic that both of them do this. And then, of course, this one lady with her child in the car rams the White House gates, and, of course, they kill her. Now, people would think to themselves, why would anybody do this? One friend of mine that just left the military, that actually was in the part of the military that deals with mind warfare, explained to me, and he said, I can't really say a whole lot to you. He said, but we have the ability, basically, if we want to, there's certain things we can do that would cause you to drop your head and walk in circles and bark like a dog. He said it's things that the military has been experimenting with for a long time now, is how to be able to control the minds of the people. And there's certain frequencies that you can send out that will make people react a certain way. Now, with this in mind, I discussed this with the people in D.C. that I know, and they had said to me that they believe that this was one of the things that was done, that was used, that caused this lady to react the way she did and to ram the gate in D.C. And they also believe it was the same thing that was used that the black man set himself on fire. Now, the reason their thinking was, and this was just them speaking on it, anonymously to me, is that they believe that the government is being forced to do certain things to try to bring about civil unrest, to disarm the nation. and I'm sure, John, you've probably already seen as well, where the United Nations sent a letter to President Obama, because it did leak to the public, telling him how he had to disarm this nation. I read the document myself. There was a certain way, but basically when they're done, you'll be out there with your little toy bow or something playing around, because you certainly won't have firearms.
Well, I wonder, Rabbi, how many people, a lot of them will give you the old, yeah, you'll take my gun when you pry it from my cold, dead hand. I wonder how many people will actually roll over when, let's say if and when the gun confiscation initiative, confiscation, not just regulation to the point where you just give up and don't buy any, but they knock on the door and say, do you have any guns? And they don't really quite believe you when you say no. So they come on in and they just toss the whole house. And then I suppose incarcerate you if you have lied to them, because you've lied to a federal officer, because they federalize the sheriff's departments and so forth. I wonder how many people will comply. You have an opinion on that?
John, I do, and the government knows how many are going to comply as well, in my opinion on that. I worked for law enforcement many years ago, and I did narcotics division for a while. And even when we did that, when we came to your house, back in those days, of course, we weren't in a marked vehicle. We would come in an old beat-up van to make it look like we were nobody, but we would have about a dozen of us inside a little cramped van, armed to the hilt. We would send one guy out to knock on your door to make it look like that he was going to be easily overtaken, and then they just swarmed the place with an overwhelming force. And that's what they're going to do as well. This is one reason why they have federalized the local municipalities, is to be able to use them at that moment's notice. This is also a reason why you see a large increase of hiring and training in law enforcement, more so than what's even needed. It's amazing what they're getting ready to do. Now, the people that are going to resist are people that they already are aware of. And that's people like, you take Chuck Baldwin out in Montana. Now, I know Chuck Baldwin personally. Chuck is a patriot. He's a Christian minister, but he's very outspoken. He's very much a patriot, and they basically have formed themselves a little militia. But unfortunately, John, we're no match. Let me just put it that way. We're no match. All it's going to end up in is a bloodbath, is what's going to happen. I do think that the average people that are in their homes, that live in, say, a little gated community, or they live in town or something like that, for the most part, they're just going to drop their guns. They're going to stop. Like you said, if they lie about it, they're going to end up in prison over it. That's the type of things that you're going to see when that comes to it. The ones that are going to resist are the good old country boys that are out in the countryside, or those that have gotten a little bit more organized in their efforts. Well, they already know about you. You're marked already, and they're going. And the thing is I've also have had a little bit of insight that they know when things are going to collapse, because they're setting it up. And now I say they know when it's going to collapse, John. They also have the power to delay it if they see there's a need to delay it. But what they're going to do is they're going to have everything in place so when things do collapse, the first people they're going for is they're going to go wipe out the troublemakers before anything, catch them completely by surprise, and just overthrow them in that regards there. So as much as, I would say like this, I'm patriotic at heart. I love this nation. I love the freedom that this nation has stood for. I had one of my family members that came in on the Mayflower. His name was a Burleson. It's through my grandmother on my father's side. And I thank God that it has remained as free as it did from the early pilgrims, even though the Vatican had their little way through it eventually. But it's still the greatest nation to live in. But we're fixing to find that that's all going to go by the wayside. And unfortunately, as much as I appreciate the things that Alex Jones brings out himself, we're going to fight a losing battle, unfortunately. If we can't change it politically, we're definitely not going to change it with an uprising. I just don't see it happen.
Yeah, it would take an awful lot of muscle to go up against the the security services, just the local police department is serious enough. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One thing that people may not know, we had actually seriously looked at buying property. We were ready to buy it. My wife felt nudged in her heart not to do it. But we were ready to buy some property in North Carolina, in the National Forest, just this past year, right in November. We had looked into this. We were very serious about doing it. And my wife just kept feeling like, something doesn't seem right. I was just going to pay cash, go up there, build a mud house, live simply, get off the grid because of the things that we know that are coming in this nation. Now, I can't say when that's going to happen, but we know it's coming. And I went ahead, I took her advice. I said, okay, we'll hold off. Right after we did that, we found out that in North Carolina that they had bought a huge number of drones to be able to patrol the national forest there. Then, not long after that, the United Nations got control of all the national lands in the United States. So they know already, the government knows what the people are doing. Now, my concern, and this is a major concern I have, we know that the Jesuits infiltrate every society, whether it be government, municipalities, whether it be private sector. I mean, this has been part of their oath, the way they do this. So when we're looking at the United States and the things that are going on here, they have worked their way into every system that there is, even into the religious systems as well. Even in the Jesuit oaths, we see that. They talk about, not in the oath that I read you there, but in their own writings, they infiltrate all the religions. They work their way up in the ranks to be able to do what? To be able to bring those religions subject to the pontiff. And by the way, on his flag, he has a flag there. He has two keys on the flag. It represents temporal, which is political power, and spiritual power. And he literally claims to be the vicar of the world. He's the one that's going to run the world both spiritually and politically as well. And so what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with peoples and governments that have infiltrated every little religion, and they're spying on every little group that there is. And what they're also doing, John, and this is the dangerous part, this is people like... I was actually going to a radio show with him, and I ended up backing out at the last minute. And he's a former Palestinian guy that speaks for he actually speaks for the federal government here. Oh gosh, I'm blank on his name right now. It'll come to me in a minute, though. But
I'll tell you what, Steve. Collect your thoughts. Collect your thoughts right now, and I'll tell you what. Let's take a little 5-minute break here, and let's come right back where we left off. So don't lose your place, because my head is spinning from everything that you have told us on this particular episode of Caravan to Midnight. And thank you for being with us. This is Rabbi Stephen Denoon, and I'll give you his website and his books in just a moment. But we're going to take 5 right now, and avoid that deep vein thrombosis thing that you get from, well, sitting too long. All right, very good. What a chat. We are speaking with Rabbi Stephen Ben Denoon. His books are Israel is Still God's People and Yom Soup, Israel's Final Exodus. That one came out just last year, and I believe Israel is Still God's People came out in 2010. Author, biblical scholar, and so forth. And we were trying to figure, Rabbi was trying to remember the name of this fellow, but wait till you hear this, because Rabbi, you remembered the name. I know you do.
Absolutely. I do remember that name there. And it was Walid Shabbat. Walid Shabbat, I was due to go on an interview with him recently. And there were a couple of things that caught my attention before I did the interview with him that just had me a little bit concerned. And I kind of felt like it's kind of a setup as well, to be quite frank, because as I mentioned right before we went on the break, before I was going to bring out his name, there are infiltrators that the government puts into ministries, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're whatever you are, Hindu, it makes no difference. The Vatican is infiltrated every religion there is to bring them under their authority and under their power, the temporal power that they claim, as well as spiritual power. And I was beginning to realize that here I am fixing to go on air with Walid Shabbat, who's a very well-known guy, appears to be a good, solid Christian guy that seems to be a terrorist turned Christian and supports the Jewish people. But then I began to find out things that were going on in the background that did not look right. And one of the things was that CNN News did an article on him and interviewed him in this, challenging whether or not he was really a terrorist for the Palestinian Liberation Organization that he claimed to be. And of course, they really exposed him well. Now, let me say this, though, John. CNN was kind of in a situation that they were forced to bring this out because he had already been exposed by the Jerusalem Post. The Jerusalem Post had already done an article really beginning to challenge him on his claim to be a Palestinian terrorist. But it wasn't so much that their article exposes it. Walid Shabbat himself exposes himself. And if you go back, anyone can easily look it up. They'll see that in one place, he tells the people, I blew up a bank, an Israeli bank in Bethlehem. And then another place, you see him on national news. Mostly it's Fox News that's interviewing him when he became the famous boy in America. Fox News brings out an article saying about Walid Shabbat that they're interviewing him. And they said, now you blew up a bank in Bethlehem. No, I didn't blow up a bank. He said there were a couple of Palestinian boys outside the bank, and we were taught not to blow up a bank if there were Muslim boys around, or Muslim children. Then in another interview he says, they ask him, what's the worst thing you ever did as a terrorist? He said, I blew up a bank in Bethlehem. Then another place he says, I planted the bomb, but the bomb didn't go off. You know, so his own statements condemn him. And what I was really concerned about, John, was that I was being set up. I mean, I don't have a huge following, but you know, there's thousands of people that follow the ministry that we do. And here I was supposed to promote this interview, and I wasn't going on. It wasn't on our particular show, but it was to be on an alternative show. But I was to promote this to all the people that I had. That I was going to be on with him, and that what he was doing, he's out there promoting the idea that the Muslim people are the worst people on the face of the earth. You cannot trust them. Now, this is his own words. I've seen his interviews that he did, that he's done here in the United States with Homeland Security. He speaks at a lot of the Homeland Security places. There, he's paid $5,000 plus expenses. That's not a big issue. I mean, if you speak like that, the way he does, he's got to travel, he's got to get paid. I don't have a problem with him getting paid. But the point is, though, he goes in there and he stereotypes every Muslim to be a terrorist. And he tells these people in these meetings that they're all terrorists and they should be done away with. And you should deal with this issue because they're bad people. Then he brings out to the different religious groups that what we have to be aware of is the Muslim Antichrist. This is the Mahdi. The Mahdi is going to raise up in the Muslim world, and they're coming to destroy all the Christian people and totally wipe out the Christian people in America and the Jews, and they hate Jews, they hate Christians. Then you begin to do the research on this guy, and you find out, well, how did he convert to Christianity? He married a Catholic girl. He becomes a Catholic. And then you begin to find out there's other information out there that the Jesuits brought him in. The Jesuits trained him, and they used him, quote, basically as their poster child. He became the man that could help spread the propaganda. And the sad thing is, many prominent scholars that, and some of these guys I know, I mean, Chuck Missler, I know Chuck Missler personally. I've interviewed with Chuck Missler before. Remarkable scholar. Chuck is a very renowned scholar. Chuck's had him on. And many other scholars around the world have had this man on, and they have built him up as this great former terrorist that is an insider that knows everything about the Palestinian people, the terrorist mind, and what we should beware of. Only to find out that in the interviews that CNN even did, they even interviewed part of his family over in the West Bank, or excuse me, in Bethlehem, and one of his own cousins said he was a good boy. He was never any part of any terrorist group. You know, him said he got captured, he was taken to jail. You know, CNN could find no record of that. Now, Wally, I did send a message to Wally Shabbat, and I did say this, because I put out a video before the program because I didn't think it was right. If I know these things, it's not right for me to allow all the people that follow this ministry to be deceived and to go believe something and then corrupt their mind that there's some Mahdi that Jesus is going to raise up and kill him one day, and this is written in the Quran, which that is true, it's written in the Quran. Knowing that I know already that Islam was created by the Vatican in the first place, so then it begins to paint the picture that he's just another one of the puppets of the Vatican to perpetrate a false doctrine to get the eyes off of them and to get the world to thinking of a Muslim Antichrist. Same thing with the Twin Towers in New York. It's an inside job. A lot of people don't like to hear that because there were so many innocent lives that were lost. The Titanic, I don't know if you know this, John, the Titanic was sunk by the Catholic Church. And the reason being was because there were 3 prominent Jewish wealthy millionaires that were on the Titanic that were approached by Vatican officials to start none other than, I forget what that was called at the time in England there, but it was the bank that would end up controlling the world banks of today. And only the Rothschilds would go along with it. And so they ordered the captain to crash that ship and to sink it, to kill those three Jewish people that were on there.
Yeah, you know, that's going to be a big stretch for a lot of people, you know. I mean, that's going to be a little bit of a stretch. Let me ask you this. Rabbi Steve, can this be proved? Is there proof? Or is this surmised based on research? Or is there any way to prove any of it?
The Titanic?
Yeah.
There is some proof that is sitting out there. It's not just based on assumptions. One of the proofs are, it is a known fact that the captain of the ship was warned on 8 different occasions that he was going off course, that he was taking the ship in dangerous waters where there were icebergs, and that he was traveling at too fast of a rate of speed, and he ignored all 8 of the warnings. When the ship sailed, they made the one stop before continuing on towards of America. There is documentation that there were certain people that told to get off the ship that this was a death ship and that it was going down. Now, some people would probably surmise that there were a lot of Catholic people on board. Why would the Vatican have this ship sunk just because the 3 people would not go along with the plans that they have? But all you have to do is to go back in time, look into history itself, and look at the thousands and thousands of Catholic people that have died for the purpose of the greater cause. So even in wars that are waged, they know that there's going to be Catholic lives lost as a result of it. But in their mind, it's for the greater good. And honestly, John, I think also, in a lot of cases here, even people that are high up in the Vatican, to me, they believe that they're doing a noble cause. I mean, if it's clearly written in the Tanakh that they believe they do God a service to kill you, then it's not something to where that they are not, maybe necessarily that they all know that they're in a sinister plot to rule the world and to just be evil. I think that they really, from their heart, believe that they're doing the right thing, and that this is what, in their mind, God really wants, ultimately. It's just like with the Jewish people. It's written plainly in the documentation in the Catholic Church that because, as quote-unquote, as they call the Jews, they are Christ killers, that the Jews are meant to roam the earth. This is why right now the Vatican has no bones about it, dividing the land of Israel and shoving the Jews back to a place to where they know that the Jews will get so weak they would not be able to defend themselves against an invasion, whether it be Iranians, the Russians, whoever may come in to fight this battle that's going to get fought here very soon. It will literally take divine intervention to turn the tide of this battle.
Well, you remember that, I can't call her last name right now to save my life, but you remember Helen, the White House correspondent that was there forever saying, give it back to Palestine, it's their land. They said, well, where are the Israelis supposed to go? She goes, go back to Germany, go back to Poland. And then right after that, she was kicked out of there. So I wonder what her connection is, or if there was one. She was part of the White House press corps, so.
No doubt that there is. And the one thing that's interesting, because this is a major issue right now with the anti-Semitism that's rising around the world right now, John. Just today in Arut Shiva, I was reading an article there just before we came on the air that now, we already know the other day that the French were crying for the Jews to be thrown out of the country. But even before the French, they were wanting to throw the Jews out of Denmark. Not throw them out, but the anti-Semitism that had risen in Denmark, Norway, all over these areas here. And Al-Hadish, who is a representative of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, he declared today that the wall in Jerusalem belongs to the Palestinians. Martin Schultz, he's the only one that's actually stood up in defense of Israel recently. He's the president of the EU Parliament, and he said he rejects the idea of the boycott. That just falls on deaf ears. But it was Holland today that has had this in the Israeli news, Israel National News, that's reporting about that there is 39% of the Dutch people believe that Israel is conducting a war to wipe out the Palestinians. And all this, John, is being caused by false propaganda. It's just like with Tex Mars with his book, talking about the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews are actually Khazars. And yet, he's basing his information on a DNA research that has been debunked so badly that it's just totally bogus. But just like Hitler, when Hitler took the protocols, Hitler takes the protocols and does Mein Kampf, and then uses that to bring it out in the schools as its fact to help wipe out the Jewish people as much as he could. Now Tex Mars, who, now he's actually against the Vatican as well, but here he is against the Jewish people as well. He's promoting out this anti-Semitism. Now, from the Israeli intelligence community, the people that I know the Israeli intelligence community is here in America trying to, I shouldn't say the Israeli intelligence community, that's Israeli intelligence has let me know that they're trying to get the Jews of America to return home because they know what's happening in Europe is about to happen in the United States. We're fixing to see a major persecution of Jews here in the United States as well, just like you're seeing in Europe. And now the point that I was going to bring out about this is, biblically speaking, people like Tex Mars that say that the Jews that are there now are not really Jews is nothing but a bunch of hogwash. Because if people believe, when I say the Bible, in this case here I'm talking about the Jewish Bible, the prophet Zechariah in chapter 12, also Micah in chapter 4, around verse 10 or so, and Ezekiel, but Jeremiah, Isaiah, many of them speak about Israel coming back to her homeland. But there's a lot of debate over whether or not it's to be now or at a later date. Well, the ironic thing is that I find is that in Zechariah and Micah, for example, the Jews come back to their homeland. God says they'll never be uprooted again. But then he talks about the turmoil that they're going to face and how that the whole world will come against them. He talks in one place of the king of the north coming down and all of his comrades that will come with him or associates. And in that particular battle, which I believe has to do with when Russia comes down with Iran, and I think even Germany may join into that. And the reason why I say that was because there's a specific prophecy that mentions that God was angry with these nations, he said, because even though Israel was scattered, he said, in their dispersion, you did evil to them, something that he did not want done to his people. But, God scattered them as their punishment. But God did not want Hitler to do what he did, or nor the pogroms, nor Stalin, nor Mussolini, or any of these guys to do the evil and the wickedness that they did to the Jewish people. Now, so therefore, and then all these nations come up against them. Then finally, in the very last battle of Armageddon, the whole world turns against the Jewish people, and he brings them down there to settle the score that God wants to settle. Now, I say this, John, because the one in Zechariah I found very interesting. It doesn't call them by tribal order. He says that he would return Judah first. I'm just paraphrasing this. And that is interesting in my opinion, because Judah was the house of Judah. Israel was two different nations at one time after the death of Solomon, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. The house of Judah consisted of the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, the Levites, and the Samaritans. The house of Israel, they were scattered over 700 years before the house of Judah was scattered in 70 AD. Now, the ironic thing is, though, when we read in Zechariah, it talks about these family names. It says they come back to their homeland, they'll never be uprooted, but then he says they'll look upon this one whom they've pierced. But here's the interesting thing. It says the house of Nathan and their wives apart will mourn. The house of David and their wives apart will mourn. The house of Levi and their wives, the house of Shimei and their wives. And then he makes one other comment, very interesting. And all the families that remain. Now, when you begin to look at the family names, David and Nathan both were the tribe of Judah. Of course, the Levites were the Levites. Shimei is the tribe of Benjamin. And all the families that remain are the Samaritans. So literally, he brings back the original descendants from the first dispersion of 70 AD. And ironically, when you look, for example, like at Shimei, you can go back to Samuel to the story of David. And it was Shimei that hated David, that spit on him, that wanted to kill him when David went into exile. But when David came back, Shimei was mourning, just as Shimei does in Zechariah, which speaks of my forefathers that were there during 2,000 years ago. So he brings them back, but he brings them back so that they can have Messiah come to them. And at the same token, he brings Israel home also to allow those nations that have done so much evil to them, he brings them back for judgment. And that's to judge the nations that come against Israel. So it will be, I hate to say it, John, but I know they're going to divide the land. That's going to happen whether we like it or not. I will speak against it with every breath I have. I will speak against the Vatican's agenda on that. I mean, Miati does it. Chamish does it. A lot of people do it. But these are prominent news reporters. They're not. Chamish is not even religious, as far as I can tell. Maybe he is now. I don't want to say he's not and be rough on him like that. But Chamish does seem to be a little bit more of a secular reporter. And but yet he knows that the Vatican's agenda is to destroy Israel.
Unbelievable. Now,
and Miati being Italian.
Yeah. Rabbi Steve, People have described you as messianic. Is it possible to be a rabbi and be messianic, meaning that you believe that? Well, what does a messianic rabbi believe? What do you believe?
I myself, I am called messianic. Sometimes I don't know if I really like the term as well, and I don't say that to cause offense to Christian people that listen to the things that I say. In Judaism, if you're a rabbi and you end up believing that Yeshua or Jesus is Messiah, you're normally cut off from your people as far as they believe that you went off into far left field somewhere. Well, I did the wrong hand. Left field's that way. But biblically speaking, that's not so. I prefer to say that I have chosen to believe that Yeshua is Mashiach. And with my own people, I don't like to cram this down their throat, but I like to bring up points for consideration for them to think about if they're interested in hearing those points. But I'm careful about being labeled as a messianic because I still hold very dearly mitzvah, which is typical amongst Jewish people to keep mitzvot, as we say mitzvot, which are the traditions or the laws of Israel. And I don't believe that there's a bunch of different gods in the world, which is sometimes that's associated with messianic, not always, not always. I will say this, John, that a lot of people don't know. In Israel, there's over 1,000 Orthodox Jews that believe the same way I do. And ironically, in our intelligence community, we have people that believe that way. There's people in government that believe that way, but they can't say it as of yet. They just feel that it's not the right time. And I can understand where they're coming from. This is one reason why I don't like to press. Let me say this. I speak what I believe on the channel that I have, because anyone that wants to come and listen, they can. And if it touches a Jewish heart, then I'm all for it. But really, there's no difference between me and another rabbi that believes that the Messiah is coming, but they don't believe that Jesus is that Messiah. And it's not uncommon for any Jewish person to believe that Messiah has already come or will come, because I'm associated with, I'm not part of it, I am associated with a Chabad organization of Jews. And because of that, they believe that the blessed Rabbi Menachem, they believed that he was Messiah. But the funny thing is he never believed that himself, because we can see what he says publicly, that he didn't believe that. So I don't think that my thoughts are really much different than my own brethren are. The only difference is just as they have in their minds, they may have ascribed to a certain person as Messiah in the past. We've had probably about 13 different people or 13 different candidates that were considered to be the Messiah since the days that Jesus walked the shores of Galilee. But as the well-known Rabbi Meister, which I actually met Rabbi Meister, he used to always say, he says, you know what? What we'll do is when Messiah comes, we will just have to ask him, is this your first time or your second time coming?
That's fantastic. Rabbi Stephen, what is your channel in case some people would like to visit you on the web?
If they type in my name, Stephen Denoon, or if you typed in Stephen Ben Denoon, I'm not actually sure what the channel's called. I think it's just called my name, Stephen Denoon. But you can type that on Google, and you'll be bombarded with more stuff than you could possibly deal with. But there are a lot of videos out there. And it's very different. I will tell you that. It's very different. It's caught the attention of a lot of scholars. Mark Beltz has become a friend as well. It's, of course, Chuck Missler. I interviewed with Chuck before. And I had a private interview with Sid Roth recently, and he was just blown away by the things that I write as well. And even with Daniel Lappin, Rabbi Daniel Lappin, up out of Daniel's up in Washington State, I believe. Some of the things that I've done even it's really struck his heart as well. So I can play a balance in there as well, because there's some things that I write about or that I speak about that my own people will not take offense to because it's more neutral. So it just depends on what you want to listen to.
It's been a real pleasure having this time with you, and I know we're going to stay in touch, but I would like to just leave the invitation to come back on the program open, so that when you come across some more information that you think people would appreciate hearing, you will come on the program again and let them have it, just like you did this time. This has been some incredible stuff. The Vatican crossover is amazing. And I said crossover into all these different areas. In fact, I narrate a program called Unsealed Alien Files. In my opinion, it's the best UFO investigative show out there. But there was a story that I narrated on one of the episodes that had to do with the Vatican concealing alien skulls, the elongated ones, and burying them under the basilica, under St. Peter's Basilica. And there's a nun at the end of the episode that says, well, the Holy Fathers must have had a very good reason for burying these skulls so that they would be forgotten. And it sounds to me like there are a lot of secrets that have been buried by the Vatican. A very, very powerful organization. Rabbi Steve Ben Denoon. You've seen his website across the bottom of the screen. In case you missed it, it's IsraelReturns.com, his books, Israel is Still God's People, and Yom Soup, Israel's Final Exodus. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, John. You have a great night.
You too. So what do you think?
I think it was excellent.
Well, I think it was excellent too, and more to the point, I think it gives people a lot of food for thoughts. Well, thank you very much for being here. We will carry on with the next episode of Caravan to Midnight at some near point in future as we struggle with our servers and struggle with our bandwidth, but we will improvise, adapt, modify, and overcome. Exercise caution in your daily affairs.